Yo! Welcome to Arcane Paradox. Got an absolute banger for you today. Fawkes rejected Dumbledore's magic at sorting and exposed his 57-year plan to use Harry as weapon. Like, subscribe, comment below. Let's go. Chapter 1. The bird knows the sorting hat smelled like old libraries and something else, something Harry couldn't name, something that sat at the back of his throat like the memory of smoke. He sat on the stool in front of what felt like the entire world and tried not to think about how quiet it had gotten. 1,000 candles floated overhead. For long tables stretched the length of the great hall, packed with students who all seemed to know something he didn't, wearing robes that fit, with hair that had been combed by someone who cared. The ceiling above them was doing something impossible with stars. Harry had stopped being surprised by impossible things approximately 45 minutes ago, somewhere between the ghost who walked through a wall and the staircase that tried to eat his left foot. The hat slipped down over his eyes and the great hall disappeared. "Well," said a voice directly inside his skull. "There you are." It didn't sound the way he'd expected. He'd expected something ancient and formal, a voice like Professor McGonagall's, clipped and certain. Instead it sounded almost surprised. Like it had been waiting for someone and had nearly given up. "Interesting," it continued, and Harry had the uncomfortable sensation of something very old and very patient leafing through him the way you'd leaf through a book you'd already read but wanted to check a passage in. "Very interesting." "You're not, wait." The pause that followed was long enough that Harry started to wonder if the hat had fallen asleep. "There is something on you," it said, slowly, the way you might say it if you'd found a spider on someone's shoulder and were deciding whether to mention it. "Something placed. Old work, very old, very fine. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." "What do you mean, something on me?" Harry whispered. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to talk but he was fairly certain that a voice in his head warranted a response. "Enchantments," the hat said, and now its tone had changed, flattened into something careful, something that walked a line between stating a fact and making an accusation. "Layered. The kind of work you do not do casually or quickly. Someone spent considerable time on this. They have been with you a long while, these marks, since before you could form memory, I would think." Harry opened his mouth to ask what that meant, what any of that meant, whether it was dangerous, whether he should be worried, but the hat had already moved on with the brisk efficiency of something that had been sorting 11-year-olds for 1,000 years and developed strong feelings about efficiency. "Gryffindor," it said, decisively, and then, quietly, so quietly Harry almost thought he'd imagined it, "Be careful, boy. There are plans around you like walls." Then it was gone, lifted from his head, and the Gryffindor table erupted. Harry walked toward the noise and the waving hands on autopilot, the hat's last words following him like a second shadow. He sat down between a red-haired boy named Percy who immediately began explaining the point system with an enthusiasm that suggested he'd been waiting for an audience, and a ghost who introduced himself as nearly headless Nick and demonstrated why, and Harry smiled and laughed in the right places and watched Dumbledore at the head table over the tops of people's heads. The headmaster was watching him. Not the way people had been watching him all evening, not with the wide-eyed, slightly starstruck quality that Harry had already decided he was going to find exhausting. Dumbledore was watching him the way a chess player watches a piece they've just moved onto a complicated square. Patient. Satisfied. Already thinking about the move after next. Harry looked away first. He wasn't sure why that felt important, but it did. The feast appeared, just appeared, as though the table had simply decided to stop being empty, and Harry forgot about the hat and its warnings and Dumbledore's chess player eyes because he hadn't eaten a proper meal since the last time Dudley had left something on his plate by accident, and the chicken alone was worth setting aside a low-grade existential crisis. He was halfway through his second helping when the fire happened. Not a fire, the fire. There would never be another fire quite like it. It started as a sound, high and clear and completely out of place, cutting through the chatter and the clinking of cutlery and Percy's ongoing monologue about Hogwarts, a history. A single note, like someone had struck a bell made of sunlight. People stopped talking. Heads turned. The note climbed, split into two, then three, then became something that wasn't quite music and wasn't quite speech but existed in the space between them where the most important things live. Then the air above the staff table split open in a column of gold and orange flame, and out of it, wings spread wide enough to shadow 3 seats, came the most extraordinary bird Harry had ever seen. Red and gold, feathers the color of lit coals, a tail that trailed like the last light before sunset. It circled the great hall once, slowly, deliberately, as though it wanted to make sure everyone got a good look, and the song it was making wrapped around Harry's ribs and squeezed until he felt something that had no name and no opposite, something that was grief and relief in the same breath. Students were whispering Phoenix up and down the tables. Harry had read about them. Hermione Granger, 2 seats down, had probably read about them in more depth than anyone else at the table and was currently demonstrating this by telling everyone within earshot about their healing tears and their connection to fire. But Harry wasn't listening to Hermione, because the phoenix had stopped circling. It had stopped circling and it was looking at him. Not in the way animals looked at you, assessing, calculating food or threat. It looked at him the way the Sorting Hat had, with that quality of recognition, of there you are, as though it had been wading through a considerable inconvenience and was quietly pleased that it was finally over. At the staff table, Dumbledore had risen to his feet. Something had changed in his face, that patient satisfaction was gone, replaced by something he was working very hard to keep from being visible. His hand had moved toward his wand almost without his seeming to notice. "Fawkes," he said, and his voice was warm and gentle and carried easily over the stunned silence of the hall. "Come, my friend. Back to the perch." The phoenix, Fawkes, turned his head and regarded Dumbledore with a look that Harry would describe later, to Hermione, as politely final. Like someone declining a dinner invitation. Not rude. Just absolutely, immovably decided. Then Fawkes folded his wings and dove. He crossed the length of the great hall in 3 seconds flat and landed on Harry's shoulder. The contact it was like stepping out of a room you'd been in so long you'd stopped noticing the smell, into cold night air. It was like the moment when you've been holding your breath without realizing and you finally let it go. Harry's vision didn't change, not exactly, but it sharpened, the way candlelight sharpens when your eyes adjust, and he felt things happening under his skin that he didn't have the vocabulary for yet. He heard Dumbledore's sharp intake of breath from 30 feet away. And then the song came. Fawkes opened his beak and sang directly into the shell of Harry's ear, and the music wasn't music anymore, it was images, sensations, fragments of things that had happened before Harry was old enough to have memories but which his body apparently recognized anyway. He saw a man with kind eyes and messy black hair, laughing at something. He saw a woman with red hair and green eyes, his eyes, he realized, with a dull shock, bending over a crib, whispering something. He saw a study, firelit, and Dumbledore younger but unmistakably himself, sitting at a desk with a boy who was not yet a boy but just a name he was assigning a destiny to. He saw a diagram drawn in light, complex as a spider's web, and at its center a single word in old runes that Harry didn't know but which the Phoenix song translated directly into something his bones understood, sacrifice. He saw a newborn baby, sleeping, and 2 hands moving over the sleeping child in slow, deliberate patterns, drawing in the air, tracing lines that left marks on skin that no one would ever see and that would grow as the child grew, woven in so finely that the child would never feel them, never question why certain things came harder than they should, why a voice in the back of his head always said be small, be quiet, don't show what you can do. The enchantments shattered. There was no other word for what happened. They didn't fade or dissipate, they broke, each one, in rapid sequence, like a string of firecrackers going off under Harry's skin, and the magic that had been sitting on him his entire life cracked apart and the magic that lived under it, native and ungoverned and considerable, lurched into the space vacated like a prisoner who'd finally found the door open. Every candle in the great hall went out. Every single one, simultaneously, without drama or build-up, just out, as though someone had made a decision, and then there was darkness lit only by Fawkes, who blazed on Harry's shoulder like a second sun, and by the star-scattered ceiling above, and by the cold blue light that was now, Harry noticed with distant academic interest, coming from his own hands. Someone at the Hufflepuff table screamed. Several people dove under their benches. At the staff table, a woman Harry didn't know yet had appended a goblet, and Professor Quirrell had sat down very suddenly and was making a sound like a small engine in distress. Dumbledore stood very still. "Harry," he said, into the darkness, and his voice was warm and calm and absolutely controlled, and underneath all of it, underneath the layers of performance and care and grandfatherly gentleness, Harry could hear, with whatever the Phoenix song had opened in him, the calculation. The adjustment. The rapid, brilliant, relentless thinking. "Harry, my boy. It's all right. Let's take a breath, shall we?" Harry looked at him across the dark hall, Fawkes burning on his shoulder, his own magic moving through him for the first time without the invisible governors that had always been there shaping its direction, its force, its possibilities, and he said, very quietly, "What did you put on me?" The silence after that was a different kind of silence. Dumbledore's expression did something complicated. The warmth didn't leave it, that was the impressive thing, Harry thought. A lesser performer would have let the mask slip. Dumbledore simply layered one expression over another, concern settling over calculation like one transparency over another, and said, "I don't know what you mean, my dear boy. You've had quite an overwhelming evening, perfectly understandable, the magic here sometimes, 57 years, Harry said. He didn't know where the words came from. The Phoenix song, still fading in his ears, still burning behind his eyes, unspooling fragments and dates and the shape of a plan so large it had to be seen from a distance to be understood. You started planning this 57 years ago. There's a name for what you drew on me. In the old runes. It means channel. Like a pipe. Something you move things through. Somewhere in the hall, a candle relit itself. Then another. They came back slowly, hesitantly, as though the room wasn't entirely sure the drama was over. Dumbledore's hands were still. His face was still. He said, in a voice of perfect gentleness, "Professor McGonagall, perhaps we should clear the students to their dormitories." McGonagall didn't move immediately. She was looking at Harry with an expression he would spend a long time thinking about later, not surprise, exactly. More like the specific, terrible look of someone who has suspected something for years and suddenly cannot pretend they haven't. "Harry," said Hermione, from 2 seats down, in a completely different tone than anyone had used all evening, direct and quiet and entirely unsentimental. "Are you hurt?" He checked. The light had faded from his hands. Fawkes had settled on his shoulder with the easy weight of something that had made a permanent decision. "No," he said. "Good," she said. "Then sit down and eat something, because I suspect the next few hours are going to be extremely complicated and you should probably not face them on an empty stomach." He sat down. Fawkes made a sound low in his throat, not singing, just a warm, continuous note, like a cat purring, and Harry reached up without thinking and ran a hand along the phoenix's wings, and felt something that he recognized, distantly, as the first time he'd ever had anything that was entirely, unambiguously his. McGonagall made a movement toward Dumbledore and stopped. Dumbledore said something to her too quietly for Harry to hear. She turned away from him and began directing the prefects to move the younger students toward the doors, her voice perfectly controlled, her face doing nothing at all, which Harry was already learning to read as a language of its own. Ron Weasley, sitting directly to Harry's right, had been staring at him with an expression of pure, undiluted awe since approximately the moment the candles went out. "Wicked," he said, with great feeling, and Harry laughed, unexpected and genuine, and for 30 seconds the weight of everything that had just happened lifted enough to breathe under. The great hall emptied in stages. The first years stayed, because no one had thought to tell them to leave, and they clustered at the end of the table in a knot of wide eyes and whispers, watching the staff table with the particular interest of children who have just realized that adults don't, in fact, have everything under control. Dumbledore remained standing. He looked, Harry thought, exactly like a man who was recalculating. That was when Professor Quirrell slid out of his seat and moved toward the door, and Fawkes turned his head and made a sound that was not the healing, warm note of Phoenix song but something older and stranger, a sound like a warning siren heard through water, and Harry looked at the back of Quirrell's turbaned head and felt, without understanding why, that there was something wrong under the fabric. Something cold. Something that didn't belong. But Quirrell was already gone, the door swinging shut behind him, and Fawkes settled again, and there were larger immediate problems. "I think," said Dumbledore, finally, into the near-empty hall, "that you and I should have a conversation, Harry." "Yes," Harry agreed. "We probably should." He stood up. Fawkes rose from his shoulder and circled once, then settled again. From 30 feet away, he watched Dumbledore watch the Phoenix with an expression that was, finally, honest, the first honest expression Harry had seen from him all evening. It was grief. Not guilt. Not fear. Grief, the grief of a man who has just watched something he loved make a choice he had not anticipated and cannot unmake. Harry filed that away. He had the feeling it was going to matter. "Not tonight," Harry said. "I want to go to bed." Dumbledore blinked. The grief reorganized itself rapidly into something avuncular and understanding. "Of course. Of course you do. It's been quite an evening. Tomorrow, perhaps, after breakfast, after classes," Harry said. A pause. Something moved behind those half-moon glasses, not quite amusement, not quite reassessment, something between them. "After classes," Dumbledore agreed. Harry nodded once, as though that was settled, and turned toward the doors, and Fawkes rode his shoulder down the length of the great hall with the unhurried composure of something that had already decided where it was going and was merely waiting for its companion to catch up. He heard, from behind him, McGonagall say quietly, "Albus." And he heard, in the way you hear something when a door is closing and the last sound is already half swallowed, Dumbledore respond, "Not now, Minerva." The stone corridor outside the great hall was cold and smelled of old wood and something green, and the other first years were waiting for Percy, who arrived looking flustered and authoritative in equal measure, and led them up the staircases in a column while the moving portraits tracked their progress with varying degrees of interest. Harry walked in the middle of the group. Hermione fell into step beside him. "The song," she said, without preamble. Everybody heard it. Or, heard something. I don't think everyone heard the same things. Lavender Brown said she heard her grandmother. Seamus said he heard the sea. "What did you hear?" Harry asked. Hermione hesitated, which was unusual for her. "Mathematics," she said, finally. "Very old mathematics. The kind that describes patterns, systems. Like listening to something very large being described by its component parts." She looked at him sideways. "What did you hear?" Harry considered how much to say. He had known Hermione Granger for approximately 6 hours and already had a fairly good read on her. She was brave in the specific way that intelligent people are brave, which is that she would follow a line of truth wherever it went, even if she didn't like where it ended. That was a useful quality. "A plan," he said. "Mostly dates. Fragments. And something someone put on me when I was a baby that the Phoenix just broke." Hermione absorbed this with her characteristic efficiency. "Who put it there?" "I have a working theory," Harry said. She looked at him steadily. "So do I," she said, and there was something in her voice, not accusation, not even certainty, just the flat sound of someone who has added up the numbers and gotten the same answer twice. "Based on what the Phoenix did when Professor Dumbledore told it to come back to him." "It didn't," Harry said. "It didn't," Hermione confirmed. They climbed the last staircase in silence. Fawkes had gone quiet on Harry's shoulder, not absent or sleeping, just present and still, the way a very old person is sometimes quiet not because they have nothing to say but because they have learned that most things don't need saying twice. The fat lady in her portrait looked at Fawkes with an expression of complete astonishment and then said, "Password," in a voice that had forgotten to be officious. "Caput Draconis," Percy said. The portrait swung open. The Gryffindor common room was warm and red-lit and smelled of ancient stone and wood smoke, and the older students who were already there stopped talking and stared at Harry with an attention that was beginning to feel familiar and had not yet stopped feeling uncomfortable. Harry ignored them. He found a chair by the fire, because the room was cold in the specific way that large stone buildings are cold when you've spent 10 years sleeping in a cupboard and your baseline for warmth was set very low, and Fawkes stepped off his shoulder and settled onto the back of the chair with the decisive air of someone who has found a perch and intends to keep it. Ron dropped into the chair across from him. "Right," he said. "So. The Phoenix." "Yes," Harry said. "Dumbledore's Phoenix. The one that lives in his office and he's had for ages." "Yes. That Phoenix." Ron pointed at Fawkes. "Is now on your chair." "Yes." Ron looked at Fawkes. Fawkes looked at Ron with calm, appraising gold eyes. Ron looked back at Harry. "Wicked," he said, for the second time, with the exact same sincerity. Hermione had found a seat to Harry's left and was already opening a bag to take out a book, because Hermione Granger apparently processed extraordinary events through research the way other people processed them through staring at the ceiling. "We should write down everything while it's fresh," she said. "Everything you heard. Everything you felt, if that's the right word. The enchantments, how they felt when they broke, what was underneath them. All of it." Harry looked at her. "You believe me?" "Of course I believe you," she said, as though this wasn't remarkable at all. "I heard mathematics in a Phoenix song. I believe everything tonight." Ron leaned forward in his chair. "What's this plan, then? The one you said you heard about?" Harry stared at the fire. Fawkes pressed warmly against the back of his head, feathers against his hair, and the Phoenix song had left something behind in him. Not the images anymore, those were fading, but a kind of clarity, a sharpness, as though something that had always been slightly out of focus had been adjusted. "I don't have it all," he said. "It was fragments." "But," he stopped. "You know who I am." "The scar." "Everybody knows," Ron said, and had the decency to sound slightly awkward about it. "My mum talked about it loads." "What everyone knows," Harry said, "is that Voldemort tried to kill me and the curse rebounded because of my mum's sacrifice. That I lived because of love. And Dumbledore put me with the Dursleys to protect me, to keep me safe, and one day I'll come to Hogwarts and learn magic and probably do something about Voldemort." "Yeah," Ron said. "That's more or less the story." "The Phoenix showed me another version," Harry said. "One that's been running underneath that story since before I was born." He looked at his hands. The blue light was gone, but the magic was still there, had always been there, he knew now, just compressed, redirected, kept manageable. "In this version, I'm not supposed to defeat Voldemort. I'm supposed to die stopping him. A death that's been planned. A sacrifice with specific conditions, specific timing, specific results." He said the word like it tasted wrong. "I'm a channel. Something Dumbledore can move power through. Has been for 57 years. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the common room, an older student dropped something and swore, and the normal sound of it was so dramatically at odds with what Harry had just said that all three of them looked up briefly. "That's," Ron started, and stopped. He ran his hand through his hair, an anxious gesture that Harry would come to recognize as his tell. "That's a big claim. About Dumbledore." "I know," Harry said. My mum and dad, they think he's basically, the greatest wizard of the age." "Yes," Harry said, without particular heat. "I know. That's rather the problem, isn't it? Nobody questions the plan because the plan comes from Dumbledore." Hermione had stopped pretending to look at her book. She was looking at Harry with an expression he couldn't read yet, something that was thinking and feeling at the same time. "How old are you?" she said. Harry blinked. 11. "You don't sound 11, she said, and it wasn't a compliment or a criticism, just an observation. You sound like someone who's been trying to figure out the rules of a room they're trapped in. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. About 11 years of learning to read the temperature of a room before he walked into it, learning to make himself small, learning to gauge how much the Dursleys had drunk and how tired they were before deciding whether to ask for dinner. Learning to survive in a place where his survival was not anyone's priority. Yeah, he said. That's about right. They sat with that for a moment. Fawkes made a low sound. Okay, Hermione said, and her voice had that decisive quality that Harry would come to think of as her changing gears, from feeling to doing, from processing to acting. Here's what we know for certain. The Phoenix is real. What it did to you is real. I watched it happen and I know what breaking enchantments looks like from the magical theory side. Those candles didn't go out because you were scared or excited. That was a ward break. Something was removed. She counted on her fingers. We know that Dumbledore's response was not the response of someone who was surprised by an animal behaving oddly. We know he wanted this conversation to happen tonight, on his terms, and you, she glanced at him with something that might have been admiration, you denied him that. We don't know anything else, Harry said. Not yet, she agreed. But we will. Ron had been quiet for a moment longer than usual, which meant he was thinking hard. My dad works at the ministry, he said, slowly. He's mentioned things, about the old laws. About Phoenix bonds. Said once that a Phoenix bond was basically unbreakable, that there were old cases where a bonded Phoenix refused an owner and the courts had to rule on who the bird belonged to. He looked at Fawkes. If Fawkes bonded you, I don't think Dumbledore can just take him back. Fawkes tilted his head, a movement so precisely timed to Ron's words that it was difficult to interpret it as anything other than agreement. He's not going to try to take him back, Harry said, with a certainty that came from somewhere below thought. Not directly. That would confirm too much. He's going to try to explain this. All of it. He's going to be very kind and very reasonable and he's going to have an answer for everything, and the answers are going to be almost true enough. How do you know that? Ron asked. Because that's what I would do, Harry said. If I'd spent 57 years building something and someone had just stumbled into the foundation. The fire had burned lower. The older students had filtered up to bed in ones and twos, throwing looks at Harry and Fawkes that ranged from awe to anxiety. The common room was nearly empty now, just the three of them and the embers and the sound of the castle breathing around them in the specific way that old buildings breathe, settling, shifting, something alive in the stone. Harry looked at the fire and thought about the images the Phoenix song had given him. His father laughing. His mother's green eyes, his eyes. The diagram drawn in light, the word that meant channel. Dumbledore's hands moving over a sleeping baby. He thought about the hat, that morning. Be careful, boy. There are plans around you like walls. The walls were down now. Or at least the ones on the inside were. I need to know everything, he said. Not just about this. About all of it. Voldemort, the prophecy, the old magic, all of it. The real versions, not the ones that have been shaped for me. The library opens at 7, Hermione said immediately. We'll need the restricted section, Harry said. She paused, just briefly. I know a way. Ron looked between them. We've been here 6 hours, he said. We haven't even been to class yet. A pause. This is brilliant. This is absolutely brilliant, I love this, this is the best thing that has ever happened. Harry laughed, and it felt the same as it had in the Great Hall, unexpected, genuine, the kind of laughter that comes from somewhere real rather than the social kind that you perform. It had been a long time since he'd laughed that way. He wasn't sure he'd ever laughed that way. Fawkes made a sound that was so close to a laugh of its own that Ron actually pointed at the bird. See. He agrees. He definitely agrees, Harry said. Right, so. Ron leaned forward, elbows on knees, with the specific energy of someone who has decided to be all in and is relieved about it. We've got a dodgy headmaster, a 57-year plan, a phoenix who staged what I can only describe as a coup in the middle of the sorting feast, and whatever Quirrell is doing, because you made a face at the back of his head and I want to know what that was about." Harry had almost forgotten about that, the cold feeling, the sound Fawkes had made. "Something's wrong with him," he said. "I don't know what yet." "Add it to the list," Hermione said, and she'd gotten out a small notebook from somewhere and was writing in it, and the sight of that, her handwriting neat and quick, translating chaos into order, was oddly steadying. This was manageable. The walls were down and it was cold and the plan he'd been living inside without knowing it was still built around him, but he had a phoenix. He had a girl with a notebook and an inexhaustible appetite for truth. He had a red-haired boy who had looked at the most unexpected thing Harry had ever done and said wicked like it was simple. He was 11 years old. He had been in the wizarding world for exactly 1 day. He had arrived carrying someone else's destiny like a suit of clothes chosen before he was born. He intended, methodically and without particular drama, to take it off. "Get some sleep," he said, and Fawkes stepped back onto his shoulder as he stood. "Tomorrow's going to be busy." He climbed the stairs to the dormitory. The other boys, Ron trailing behind him, Neville Longbottom already half asleep in his bed, Dean Thomas watching the phoenix with round eyes, Seamus Finnegan pretending to read, all made various sounds of greeting or astonishment, and Harry answered them all with something friendly and brief, because there would be time for introductions and friendships and the normal texture of boarding school life, and he wanted all of that, genuinely. But right now his mind was still running. He sat on the edge of his bed. Fawkes stepped off his shoulder and settled onto the headboard, tucking one wing slightly, the posture of an animal that has finished the active portion of its evening and is prepared to wait. The gold eyes stayed open. Harry reached under his robe collar and found the smooth skin of his chest, over his sternum. He couldn't see anything. Couldn't feel anything. But the hat had said it, and the phoenix had confirmed it in the most dramatic possible fashion, and he believed it the way he believed in gravity, not because someone had explained it to him but because he had always felt it. The slight ceiling on things. The way his best efforts always fell just short. The voice that said be smaller, be quieter, don't let them see. Enchantments. Drawn on an infant's skin by careful, brilliant hands. By a man who genuinely believed it was for the best. That was the part Harry kept coming back to. The grief on Dumbledore's face when Fawkes chose. Not the guilt, the grief. Dumbledore wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry it wasn't going to work anymore. There was something almost worse about that. Harry pulled off his glasses and lay back on his pillow and stared up at the dark canopy above him. The castle murmured and shifted. Somewhere below, a portrait argued with itself. Fawkes's breathing above his head was slow and warm and entirely unconcerned, the breathing of something ancient and fundamentally unafraid. "There are plans around you like walls," the hat had said. He thought about what Dumbledore would say tomorrow. How it would begin, warmly, with some small kindness, an offer of sweets perhaps, the famous half-moon glasses catching the light. He would explain. He would have reasons. Some of those reasons would even be true. And he would expect Harry to be, at bottom, the boy the enchantments had shaped, grateful, trusting, not quite sure enough of himself to push very hard. He was going to be disappointed about that. Harry closed his eyes. Sleep came faster than he expected, and it came without the dreams that usually followed him, the green light, the high cold laughter, the sense of something hunting. For the first time in memory, the night behind his eyes was clean and dark and quiet. Fawkes sang, very softly, just once more before silence. Outside the tower window, the first night of term moved slowly across the Scottish sky, stars wheeling, something large and dark patrolling the grounds far below, the castle enormous and full of old secrets, and somewhere in it, in a circular office lined with silver instruments that were all, quietly, doing something wrong, a very old man sat in the dark and thought. And somewhere in the dungeons, a man with cold eyes and a complicated heart received a message that made him sit very still for a very long time. And in the dormitory at the top of Gryffindor Tower, Harry Potter slept without enchantment for the first time in his life, and the Phoenix kept watch, and the night was long and the stars were very bright, and everything was just beginning. Chapter 2, What the Ashes Remember. Harry woke before the other boys. Not because of a nightmare, not because of Dudley banging on the cupboard door, not because Uncle Vernon needed the bathroom and Harry was inconveniently between him and it. He woke because Fawkes made a sound, not loud, not alarmed, just a single bright note like a finger tapping glass, and when Harry opened his eyes the bird was looking at him with an expression that somehow conveyed, across whatever gap exists between human and phoenix, pay attention. The dormitory was grey with early light. Ron was face down in his pillow making a sound like a contented tractor. Neville had managed to pull every blanket off his bed and wrap himself in them on the floor, which Harry noted without judgment. Dean and Seamus were invisible under their respective curtains. Harry sat up, reached for his glasses, and said, quietly, "What?" Fawkes stepped off the headboard and onto his knee with the particular weightlessness of a phoenix, which, Harry was discovering, felt nothing like a bird and something like holding a piece of weather. Then the song started, not the full torrent of the previous night, nothing like the wall of vision and sound that had broken the enchantments open. This was careful. Deliberate. A single thread of memory pulled from something vast. The image assembled itself behind Harry's eyes like a photograph developing in a darkroom. A study. Night. Two men, younger versions of people Harry knew, one with auburn hair going silver at the temples, half-moon glasses already established, blue eyes that even in memory had that quality of seeing everything and filing it, and another man Harry didn't recognize. Older. Academic-looking, in robes with an official crest that Harry couldn't quite read, a ministry seal maybe, something governmental. And on the desk between them, a contract. Not a piece of paper. A magical document, the old kind, the ones Hermione had apparently described to Harry before he'd ever arrived in this world and which he now understood instinctively, living vellum, ink that moved, margins that sealed themselves when both parties touched the center. The kind of contract that wasn't just an agreement between people but between magic itself, which was why breaking it cost something. Dumbledore wasn't signing it. He was dictating it, and the other man was the witness, and what Dumbledore was describing, in the measured tones of someone reading from a list, was the specific conditions under which a child yet unborn, referred to only as the subject, would be permitted to come of age. Permitted. That was the word. Harry watched Dumbledore's mouth move in the memory, read the shapes of the words without needing to hear them, and understood that what he was watching was the formal legal creation of a life sentence for someone who didn't exist yet and wouldn't, for another 16 years. Fawkes stopped singing. Harry sat in the grey dormitory light with that image behind his eyes and felt something he didn't immediately identify as anger, because anger for Harry had always been loud and messy and frightening, the kind that got him into trouble, the kind that had once caused all the glass in a zoo enclosure to vanish and a boa constrictor to escape into London, and he'd learned early that feeling it openly had costs. So he sat with it quietly for a moment and let himself know what it was. Then he got dressed. He was down the stairs and through the portrait hole before 6, Fawkes settling onto his shoulder like an accessory that had always belonged there, and the corridors of Hogwarts were empty in the particular way that large shared spaces are empty at early hours, deeply, resonantly quiet, the stone holding the night a little longer than the sky did. The portraits dozed. A ghost Harry didn't know yet drifted through a wall and stopped short at the sight of him and Fawkes, then continued without comment, because ghosts generally had good manners about the unexpected. He didn't go to the library. It was too early, and he wanted to think before he researched. He found his way to a window on the 4th floor instead, a wide stone ledge overlooking the grounds, and he sat on it and watched the sun come up over Scotland. It rose red that morning. Wide and uncomplicated, painting the lake and the forest and the castle walls in the same slow orange that Fawkes's feathers were made of, and Harry watched it and thought about the contract. Hermione found him there at 6:30. "I figured you'd be up," she said, settling herself onto the other end of the ledge with a book that she didn't open. "I heard Fawkes sing. It woke me up. Sorry." Don't apologize, I wanted to be up anyway. She looked out at the grounds. Did he show you something else? A contract, Harry said. Old one. Dumbledore dictating the conditions of he called it coming of age. The conditions under which the subject, meaning me, would be permitted to. He paused. Come of age. Like something that could be denied. Hermione's expression did the thing where it went very still while she processed. A fate binding, she said, finally. You know what that is? I read about them last night before I went to sleep. She said it without any particular awareness of how other people might receive the news that they'd done extra reading before bed on their first night at school. Ancient practice. Preministry. The idea was that a wizard of sufficient power and standing could lay a conditional enchantment on a young child, usually for dynasty reasons, inheritance, political alliances. The child would develop normally in most respects, but certain capacities, magical reserves, specifically, and particular talents, would be sealed until conditions set by the binder were met. She stopped. The conditions were always designed so that the binder held the key. What happens when the seal breaks? Harry asked. In the old texts, it was usually fine. The magic floods back, sometimes there's a physical reaction, sometimes not. She glanced at him sideways. 50 candles going out simultaneously counts as a physical reaction. And if the binder doesn't release it voluntarily? If something else breaks it? Hermione looked at Fawkes. Phoenix fire, she said, is one of the only magical substances that can dissolve a fate binding from the outside. It's referenced in about 3 books in the entire library and they all say the same thing, it can only be done if the phoenix acts independently. Not directed. Not instructed. Independently. Her voice was careful and precise and underneath the precision was something that sounded almost like outrage, controlled but present. Fawkes chose to do this. That matters. He did it in front of everyone, Harry said. Yes. He could have waited. Come to the dormitory in the night. Done it quietly. Yes, Hermione said. He could have. They both looked at the phoenix. Fawkes regarded the sunrise with supreme unconcern. He wanted witnesses, Harry said. I think, Hermione said slowly, that he has been wanting to do this for a very long time, and when he finally could, he wanted there to be absolutely no ambiguity about what he was doing and who saw it. Harry thought about the grief on Dumbledore's face. Not surprise, grief. Which meant Dumbledore had known this was possible. Had known what Fawkes thought of the plan. And kept the phoenix close anyway, trusted the bond, trusted that loyalty would hold. He made a mistake, Harry said. Dumbledore? He trusted that Fawkes valued their relationship more than he valued doing the right thing. Harry looked at the bird. That was his mistake. Fawkes ruffled his wings once, a movement that functioned approximately as a shrug. They sat until the castle began to wake around them, distant sounds, footsteps on stone, the clatter of something in the kitchens far below, the smell of breakfast beginning its slow migration upward through the floors. Then Hermione stood and straightened her robes. The library, she said. The library, Harry agreed. They picked up Ron on the way, which involved Hermione standing at the bottom of the boys' staircase and saying Ron in a tone that cut through sleep like a knife through cold butter. He appeared 2 minutes later looking disheveled and betrayed and carrying a piece of toast that he'd somehow collected on the way, which demonstrated a resourcefulness Harry found impressive. It's 6:45, Ron said. Yes, Hermione said. In the morning. Also yes. He looked at Harry. Is she always going to be like this? I think so, Harry said. Right. Ron bit his toast. Library, then. The library at 6:45 was Hermione's natural habitat and Ron's idea of a specific kind of punishment. Harry fell somewhere between them. He'd never had access to a real library before, the Dursleys having considered books a suspicious and unnecessary expense, and the novelty of thousands of volumes organized by a logic he hadn't figured out yet was still fresh enough to be interesting. Fawkes drew looks from Madame Pants, the librarian, who appeared from between the stacks with an expression of territorial outrage that softened incrementally when the phoenix made a brief, sweet sound in her direction. She retreated. The phoenix was better at people than Harry had expected. Hermione went for the theory section. Harry went for history. They split Ron between them like an additional pair of hands. "What am I looking for?" Ron asked. "Phoenix bonds," Harry said. "Legal history. Any cases where a bonded phoenix transferred allegiance." "And for me," Hermione said, "anything on Albus Dumbledore's earlier work. Pre-1960. Academic publications, original research, anything on sacrificial magic or channeling theory." Ron stared at her. "How do you already know what you're looking for?" "I stayed up until 1 making a list," she said, and disappeared between shelves. Ron looked at Harry. "She stayed up until 1 making a list," he repeated, in a tone that communicated that this was the most Hermione thing he had ever heard and that he meant it affectionately. They worked for an hour before breakfast, and what they found was less and more than Harry had expected. Less, because the direct evidence of Dumbledore's plan wasn't going to be in the Hogwarts library. Whatever documentation existed would be locked in ministry records or private archives or Dumbledore's own office. More, because the background material, the magical theory, the historical context, the legal framework, was all there, assembled patiently, and what it described was a tradition of exactly what the Phoenix song had shown Harry. Magical channeling, the theory was called. The practice of preparing a magical subject, always a child, always young enough that the conditioning would feel native rather than imposed, to serve as a conduit for a specific type of transformative magic. The most powerful version, which appeared in 3 texts under 3 different names, all of which amounted to the same concept, required the channel to be a willing sacrifice. Not forced. Not compelled. Willing. Which was why you had to shape the willingness from birth. "If they force you," Hermione said quietly, reading from a thick volume with a cracked spine, "the magic doesn't work. The sacrifice has to be genuinely given. So the entire process is about making someone want to die for a cause. Making them believe it's the right thing. Making them feel like it's their choice. While never telling them they're choosing from a menu you designed," Harry said. She looked up. "Yes." Ron had gone very quiet, which was unusual for Ron and therefore significant. He had a book open in front of him that he wasn't really reading anymore. "My family," he said, carefully. "My parents. They'd die for Dumbledore. They'd say it was for the cause, but it's the same thing, isn't it?" He looked at Harry. "Is this just you? Or is it bigger than you?" Harry thought about the scope of what the Phoenix song had sketched. Not just him. Not just one life. A plan that had started 57 years ago, which meant it had started around the time Dumbledore had defeated Grindelwald, which meant it had started at the point when Dumbledore became, definitively, the most powerful wizard in the world and also the one most aware of what power like that could produce. "He's afraid," Harry said. Or he was afraid, 57 years ago. That another dark wizard would rise. He'd just beaten one, he knew what they could do. So he decided to prepare. Not just politically, not just institutionally. Specifically. A specific person, specifically shaped, specifically positioned. He chose a family, Hermione said, still reading, her voice strange and careful. According to this, the channel has to come from a bloodline with sufficient innate power. The binder would, they would look for candidates. Monitor certain families. She paused. "Your father's family, Harry. The Potters. How long have they been notable in the wizarding world?" "I don't know," Harry said. "I don't know anything about my family." The sentence landed the way it always landed when he said it aloud, like something falling in a quiet room. Ron winced. Hermione looked up briefly, and the look said I'm sorry without making a production of it. We'll find out, she said. I'll find out. They were nearly late for breakfast and then nearly late for their first class, which was Transfiguration with Professor McGonagall, and Harry had been looking forward to this class in the abstract sense of someone who has recently discovered they can do things other people find impossible and wants to explore the edges of that, but he was now looking forward to it in a different sense entirely, because McGonagall knew something. She knew something and she hadn't said so yet, and Harry wanted to understand what she was going to do with what she knew. She was there when they arrived, already transformed back from the cat that had been sitting on a desk when they walked in. Only Hermione had recognized her immediately, only Hermione had started at the transformation, standing at the front of the room with her arms folded and her robes perfectly pressed and her face in the expression Harry was beginning to understand was her neutral position, composed, watchful, judgmental in the specific way of someone who had high standards and knew from experience that most people didn't meet them. She looked at Harry when he walked in. It was a different look than yesterday's careful nothing. This one had more in it, more weight, more something that sat behind the composure and pressed against it from the inside. She held his gaze for a beat, then moved it away and began the class. The Transfiguration lesson was, by any measure, excellent. McGonagall was the kind of teacher who made you feel like the material was interesting because she found it interesting, and her particular brand of dry wit surfaced at intervals that kept the room awake. She turned a match into a needle and back with the ease of breathing, explained the principles, circled the room like a very elegant predator. Harry had his match making a reasonable approximation of a needle within 10 minutes. Not because he was trying especially hard, because the magic, for the first time in his memory, moved the way he asked it to move. Before, there had always been a slight delay, a slight resistance, as though requests had to clear some internal bureaucracy before they were approved. Now it was direct. Intention to result, clean and immediate. McGonagall stopped beside his desk and looked at the needle. Then she looked at him. "Mr. Potter," she said, in a tone that gave nothing away. "Professor," he said. A pause. She picked up the needle, examined it, fully transfigured, properly sharp, the wood grain completely gone. She set it down. "Well done," she said, and moved on, and the slight extra beat before she moved was the only indication that anything was different from her praising any other student for any other piece of work. After class, Harry lingered at the door. Ron and Hermione waited without being asked, which he filed as important data about what kind of friends they were going to be. McGonagall came out of the classroom as the last students filtered past, and found Harry standing in the corridor, and to her credit, she didn't look surprised. She had, Harry suspected, been expecting this. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Professor. Can I ask you something?" She looked at him, at Fawkes on his shoulder, at Ron and Hermione slightly behind him. She made a decision, visible in the way her chin lifted slightly. "Walk with me," she said. They walked. Not to her office, she took them toward a stretch of corridor that was, Harry realized, deliberately out of the way, away from the paths students generally took between classes, the kind of route that a professor who knew every inch of this castle after decades might take when they wanted privacy. "You knew," Harry said, when they'd gone far enough that the nearest portrait was a sleeping landscape with no people in it. "About the enchantments. You might not have known the details, but you knew something was off." McGonagall walked 3 more steps before she stopped. She stood with her back to them for a moment, and Harry watched her shoulders do something small and private, a breath that wasn't quite steady. Then she turned. "I suspected," she said, and the word was clipped and precise and cost something. "I want to be clear about the difference. I had no specific knowledge of what Albus had done. I knew that certain things about your situation concerned me. The Dursleys, I wrote to him, before he placed you there. I told him they were the worst sort of muggles. I told him," she stopped. "He told me you needed to be somewhere the blood wards could take hold. That it was the only way to keep you safe." "And you believed him," Harry said. Not accusatory. Just the fact of it. She met his eyes. I am a practical woman, Mr. Potter. I believe in evidence. What I lacked was evidence, and what I had was an abundance of trust in a man who had, in every other area of my experience, earned it. The precision in her voice had an edge to it now, the edge of someone who is being honest in a way that is uncomfortable. That is not an excuse. It is an explanation. I want you to know the difference. I do know the difference, Harry said. Something shifted in her expression. What are you going to do? She asked. Directly. No preamble. McGonagall apparently asked direct questions and wanted direct answers. I'm going to find out everything, Harry said. All of it. The whole plan, what it requires, what conditions it runs on, who else is involved. And then I'm going to make my own choices about what happens next. He paused. I have an appointment with Professor Dumbledore this evening. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. Behind her glasses, something old and complicated was happening. Be careful, she said, finally, and it sounded like the hat, same words, same weight, but where the hat had said it with the weariness of old observation, McGonagall said it with the specific tension of someone who cared about the outcome. I will be, Harry said. Can you tell me one thing? If I can. The prophecy. You know about it? A fractional pause. I know one exists, she said carefully. I don't know its content. Who does? Dumbledore. Possibly Severus Snape, depending on how it was obtained. The Department of Mysteries has a record. She looked at him steadily. I would advise against charging directly at the Department of Mysteries on your second day of school. I wasn't planning to, Harry said, and she almost smiled. She left them at the next corridor junction. Harry watched her go, upright, precise, exactly the same as she'd looked walking in, and thought that she was doing what people did when they'd made a mistake they couldn't undo. She was deciding, in real time, what they were going to do next. He thought she'd land well. The day moved. Classes came and went, charms with Flitwick, who was enthusiastic and tiny and made the practical work seem genuinely joyful, history of magic with a ghost named Binns who had been dead long enough to have forgotten that students weren't also dead and that they might prefer a slightly more animated delivery. Harry spent history of magic reading everything Hermione had pulled for him on Phoenix bond law, which was extensive and almost entirely on his side. A bonded phoenix, according to 3 centuries of wizarding jurisprudence, could not be separated from its chosen companion by any legal, magical, or physical means without the phoenix's consent. Furthermore, a phoenix that had actively dissolved an enchantment placed by its previous keeper had, in legal terms, registered an objection, a moral objection, the texts called it, which had no analogue in any other area of magical law and which carried, depending on the relevant Wisengamot code, substantial evidentiary weight in any formal proceeding. In other words, Fawkes's action, performed publicly before hundreds of witnesses, was not just a personal choice. It was a declaration. Harry folded that information away carefully and thought about Dumbledore's office. Potions was last. Harry had read about Severus Snape the same way he'd read about everything else in the wizarding world, in books borrowed from the Dursleys' neighbors or found in library sales, the sparse biographical detail of someone known primarily as a footnote in other people's stories. Youngest potions master in Hogwarts history. Known to be talented, difficult, loyally Dumbledore's. He was not prepared for the actuality of the man. Snape entered the potions classroom the way weather entered a room, with forward momentum and a quality of contained pressure that made the air change. He was tall and dark and moved as though he had decided in advance that every other person in the room was going to get out of his way, and this decision had been so consistent and so thoroughly enforced over so many years that it had simply become true. His classroom was cold. His desk was immaculate. He looked at his first-year students with the expression of a man who had been assigned a task beneath him and was going to do it perfectly anyway. Then he looked at Harry. And something happened in his face that he controlled in approximately 1 second but which Harry, whose entire childhood had been spent reading faces for safety, caught in the half-second before it was controlled. Lily. He didn't say it. But it moved across his face the way a strong wind moves across a pond, one moment, then gone, but the surface disturbed for longer. Potter, Snape said. The roll call had not reached P yet. He was doing this deliberately. Our new celebrity. Harry said nothing. Tell me, Snape moved from his desk with that predatory, deliberate stride. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry looked at him steadily. He knew this. He'd read it, specifically, because he'd been nervous about potions and had overprepared. Draught of living death, he said. A sleeping potion of exceptional power. Snape paused for one beat. Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? Stomach of a goat, Harry said. It's an antidote to most poisons. Another pause. Snape's expression had not changed, but something in his posture had, slightly. This was not what he'd expected. What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? They're the same plant, Harry said. Also called aconite. The classroom was very quiet. Snape looked at him for a long moment. The lesson proceeded. Harry did the work, a simple potion, straightforward by the end of the theoretical prep he'd done, and the potion cooperated in the new, direct way everything had been cooperating since Fawkes burned the seal away. It came out exactly right. He was aware of Snape moving past his desk twice and not commenting, which he was fairly certain constituted, in Snape's rubric, high praise. Near the end of class, Snape paused at his desk a third time. The other students were decanting, involved in their own results and disasters. Neville had somehow managed to produce something the color of a traffic cone, and Seamus had added ingredients in the wrong order and created a smell that was theoretically impossible from those components. Snape said, very quietly, almost inaudibly in the general noise, "You have a phoenix on your shoulder, Potter." "I know," Harry said, equally quiet. "I received a communication last night," Snape said. He was not looking at Harry. He was looking at his students with his arms folded and his face doing nothing. "Instructing me to report any unusual magical activity in your presence. Any sign of disproportionate ability." Harry let that sit. "I'm telling you this," Snape continued, "because I believe you should know the nature of your environment." "Thank you," Harry said. And then, because he was 11 and Fawkes's song was still in him and the truth had a momentum that was hard to stop, "The enchantments he put on me. Did you know?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. "Not the specifics," Snape said, finally. Still not looking at him. "I knew there were conditions around you. I assumed they were protective. I did not look closely enough at the distinction between protecting a child and controlling one." The last sentence had something underneath it, a sharp edge, the sound of a man who had just thought of something that made him angry in a specific, personal way. The bell rang. Students began to move toward the door. Snape said nothing further. Harry picked up his bag, and Fawkes stepped off the desk edge and back to his shoulder, and Snape glanced at the bird, just once, a quick, unguarded look, and Harry thought, he's afraid. Not of Fawkes. Not of Harry. Of what he knows and hasn't said yet. "Professor," Harry said. Snape looked at him, and this time he didn't bother controlling the face entirely, and what was there was complicated enough that Harry couldn't catalogue it in one look. "The meeting tonight," Harry said. "Whatever he tells you about how it went, I'd like you to remember what you just told me." He left before Snape could respond. Ron and Hermione were waiting in the corridor, Ron with the expression of someone who had survived a natural disaster and wanted to talk about it, Hermione with her notebook already open. "Right," Ron said. "That was, he was awful to everyone else and then went out of his way to be normally awful to you, which is by his standards basically affectionate. He told me Dumbledore asked him to spy on me," Harry said. Hermione's pen stopped moving. "He told you that," she said slowly. "He told me. Voluntarily. Before I asked. Harry thought about the look on Snape's face when he'd seen the green eyes in a face that wasn't Lily Evans's. About the anger that had moved through his voice at the end. He's not completely committed to the plan. He serves Dumbledore, but he has his own reasons and his own lines. I think what Fawkes did last night moved something for him. He still might report to Dumbledore, Hermione said. He probably will, Harry agreed. I want him to. I want Dumbledore to know that Snape told me and that I told you and that we're not pretending not to know what's happening. He looked at them both. I'm going to that meeting tonight and I'm going to be exactly as informed as I am. No pretending to be less. No playing small. He paused. He spent 57 years building a version of me that would walk willingly into a situation designed to kill me. The least I can do is show up honest. Ron stared at him. You're 11, he said. I know. I keep having to remind myself you're 11. I know. Okay, Ron said. What do we do while you're in the meeting? Keep reading, Hermione said immediately. I want to find the prophecy. Or what we can find about it from here. The Department of Mysteries keeps the originals, but there are references, academic papers, divination texts. If we can find the language of it before Dumbledore uses it as a justification tonight, Harry goes in with more to work with. She was already moving toward the library. Ron looked at Harry. Have I mentioned she's terrifying? She's our best asset, Harry said. Come on. They found two things in the 2 hours between dinner and Harry's appointment that mattered. The first was a divination text from 1980 that referenced, in oblique academic language, a prophecy made in the year of its publication concerning a child born at the end of July to parents who had thrice defied a particular darkness. The language was careful, anonymized, but the date and the description left very little room for other interpretations. The second was a legal annotation in a text on fate bindings that specified, clearly, that a fate binding performed without the knowledge or consent of the subject's guardians, meaning the parents, was invalid under ancient magical law. James and Lily Potter had never consented to anything being placed on their son. Which meant the entire structure of Dumbledore's plan rested on a foundation that, legally, had never been solid. Harry read that annotation 3 times. Then he closed the book, and looked at the ceiling of the library, and felt something that was not satisfaction exactly but was adjacent to it, the feeling you get when the shape of something you've been sensing becomes clear. He handed the book to Hermione. Bookmark that page. She read it. Her expression went very still. Harry, she said. I know. She looked at him steadily, the library lamp making the light warm between them. He's going to try to make this about the greater good, she said. He always does. He'll say that what he did was necessary. That more lives were protected. That the discomfort of your situation is worth what it prevents. Yes, Harry said. Don't let him, she said, simply. Don't let the scale of it be used as an argument for its own necessity. Big consequences don't make wrong things right. Harry looked at her. 11 years old, 5 foot nothing, woven through with the same kind of certainty that the best people are woven through with, the kind that doesn't come from being told you're right but from having done the math yourself and followed it wherever it went. Thank you, he said. She nodded briskly and went back to her book. Ron walked Harry to the stone gargoyle at 7:45. They stood in the corridor for a moment, the castle quiet around them, and Fawkes sat on Harry's shoulder burning softly with a low, steady light that was more warmth than illumination. Lemon drop, Harry said to the gargoyle, because McGonagall had mentioned it during their walk, not as instruction, he thought now, but as gift. The gargoyle stepped aside. Ron said nothing until Harry was on the spiral staircase. Then, quietly, you're going to be fine. Harry looked back at him. I know. He wasn't afraid. That was the thing he noticed on the way up, as the spiral carried him toward the door of the headmaster's office and the silver instruments beyond it and the man who had been moving chess pieces for longer than Harry had been alive. He should have been afraid. He was 11 years old and he was about to walk into the office of the most powerful wizard in Britain and have a conversation about the plan that wizard had built around his life. But the enchantments that would have made him afraid, the ones that shaped the fear, directed it, made it produce a particular kind of compliance, were gone. And without them, what he felt, climbing toward Dumbledore's door in the company of a phoenix that had chosen him publicly and deliberately, was something cleaner and more useful. He was ready. The door opened before he knocked. The office was exactly as he'd imagined and entirely unexpected, full of silver instruments that clicked and whirred on their tables, a large bird perched near the window that was conspicuously empty, shelves of books and portraits of sleeping headmasters and a sorting hat hanging from a hook that tilted very slightly in his direction as he entered, as though acknowledging him. Dumbledore was behind his desk. He looked exactly like himself, the magnificent robes, the half-moon glasses, the white beard, the blue eyes that saw everything and gave nothing away. The bowl of lemon drops was on the desk. The fire was warm. Everything arranged, deliberately or instinctively, to communicate safety and wisdom and the comfortable air of a meeting between trusted allies. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm as the fire. "Come in. Sit down. Lemon drop." Harry sat down. Fawkes hopped from his shoulder to the arm of the chair and sat there, between Harry and Dumbledore, and regarded the old man across the desk with calm, unwavering gold eyes. Dumbledore looked at the phoenix. Something moved through his face, something old and private that resolved back into warmth in less time than most people took to blink. "It is good to see you, my friend," he said, softly, to Fawkes. Fawkes made a sound that was not unkind and was not welcoming and was not the sound of something that would be coming back to the empty perch. Dumbledore drew a breath and turned his attention to Harry with the focused warmth of a very, very skilled conversationalist opening the most important conversation of his century. Harry let him talk. He sat in the chair with his hands loose in his lap and his eyes on Dumbledore's face, and he listened to the beginning of the explanation, the warmth, the kindness, the reasonable voice, the very nearly true things, and underneath all of it the relentless, brilliant chess player thinking already positioning the next move, and he waited. And when the first pause came, he said, "Tell me about the contract." The fire crackled. Dumbledore was still for 2 seconds, which was, Harry was fairly certain, a very long time for Albus Dumbledore to be still. "I see," the old man said, finally. "I'd like to," Harry agreed. "See. All of it." Outside the window, Scotland was dark and wide and entirely indifferent to the plans of men. Fawkes sat on the chair arm and burned. And in the circular office, the conversation that would take the next 57 years apart and decide what grew in their place finally, properly, began. Chapter 3, The Sorting Hat Speaks. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Harry didn't tell Hermione and Ron everything immediately. He came back to the common room at nearly 10, dropped into his chair by the fire, and sat for a moment in the particular silence of someone who has just been in the presence of something large and needs a breath before describing it. Fawkes settled onto the chair back. The common room was mostly empty, a few fifth years at a corner table, heads bent over parchment, not paying attention. Ron handed him a piece of cold toast from dinner. Harry ate it without tasting it. "Well?" Ron said, after approximately 30 seconds, which was impressive restraint for Ron. "He's good," Harry said. "He's very, very good." "Good how?" Hermione had her notebook open already. "He admitted things," Harry said. "Not everything. Not the contract, not directly. But he admitted that certain arrangements had been made. That my upbringing, my circumstances, had been shaped with a purpose in mind." He looked at the fire. "And then he explained why, and the explanation was," he paused, choosing the word with care, "compelling." Hermione's pen had stopped. "You didn't believe him." "I believe that he believes it," Harry said. "That's different. He genuinely thinks what he did was necessary. He has a theory, about Voldemort, about dark magic, about how the only way to end something that deep is from the inside. From sacrifice. He looked at them both. He's not wrong that Voldemort is dangerous. He's not wrong that ordinary methods haven't worked. What he's wrong about is that he gets to decide what I do about it. What did he say about the contract? Hermione asked. He didn't confirm it, Harry said. He didn't deny it either. When I named it directly, he said that certain protective measures had been taken, that they were for my benefit and for the benefit of the wider wizarding community, and that he hoped, given time, I would come to understand the necessity. A pause. He also said that with the measures now removed, I would need to be particularly careful, because I was effectively unshielded. Ron made a noise. The measures he put on you weren't shields. No, Harry said. They weren't. But notice how he described them as if they were. He looked at the fire again. That's what he does. He takes a true thing and wraps something else in it and presents the whole package as the true thing. Hermione was writing. Did he say anything about the prophecy? He said there was one. He said its contents were being kept private for my protection. Harry's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. I told him I'd already found a description of it in the library. Ron's eyebrows went up. What did he do? He was quiet for about 4 seconds. Which I think means I surprised him. Harry thought about those 4 seconds, the way the warmth in Dumbledore's expression had held perfectly in place while everything behind it recalibrated. Then he said that partial information could be more dangerous than none. That the prophecy required context he wasn't ready to provide. Not ready, Hermione said. Not you're too young or it would put you in danger. Not ready. Like it's on his timetable, Harry said. Because in his plan it is, she said quietly. They sat with that. A log shifted in the fire. One of the fifth years at the corner table swore softly at something in a textbook. He also, Harry said, and something in his tone made both Ron and Hermione look at him more closely, asked me not to discuss this with other students. He said it was for their safety as much as mine. That there were people who would use information about my situation to cause harm. He's trying to isolate you, Hermione said immediately. Trying to, Harry agreed. Ron looked between them. You didn't agree. I told him I appreciated his concern and that I'd keep that in mind. Harry met Ron's eyes with something that was, in the circumstances, a remarkably good impression of serene. Which is not the same thing as agreeing. Hermione closed her notebook. What are we doing tomorrow? The restricted section, Harry said. You said you knew a way. She hesitated, just a fraction. Professor Dumbledore might not sign the permission slip. I wasn't going to ask him, Harry said. Another brief hesitation, different this time, not reluctance, just recalibration. There's a passage behind the third shelf on the east wall of the reference section, she said. I found it this morning when I was looking at the architecture. There's no locking charm on it, I think they rely on students not knowing it's there. Ron stared at her. You've been here one day. I did a lot of reading about the library layout over the summer. Right, Ron said. Obviously. Sleep, Harry said, standing. Tomorrow. He climbed the stairs to the dormitory and changed into pajamas by feel in the dark, and Fawkes settled onto the headboard again with the easy patience of something that didn't need sleep the way other things did but understood the concept and was willing to accommodate it. Harry lay back on his pillow and thought about Dumbledore's office. The thing that stayed with him wasn't the admission, or the deflection, or even the chess player quality of every sentence. It was the moment at the very end, when Harry had stood to leave. Dumbledore had stayed behind his desk, and for the length of time it took Harry to walk to the door, he'd simply watched, and in that watching there was something that Harry couldn't dismiss, something that sat uncomfortably alongside everything else. The old man loved him. Or thought he did. Or loved the idea of him enough that the distinction had blurred past usability. That was, Harry thought, probably the most dangerous thing about him. He fell asleep to the sound of Fawkes breathing. The next 2 days moved in a rhythm. Classes, library, the slow accumulation of evidence. Hermione's passage behind the third shelf turned out to lead not directly to the restricted section but to a service corridor that ran alongside it, and from there a simple Alohomora, which all three of them had mastered by their second charms lesson, opened the restricted section's side entrance. They moved through it in the 20 minutes before breakfast and the 40 minutes between dinner and curfew, and what they found there built, piece by piece, into something structural. The fate-binding legal annotation led to a broader corpus of texts on preministry magical contracts. The contract theory led to records of similar historical cases, 3 of them, going back 4 centuries, all involving a powerful wizard shaping a younger one for a specific purpose. In 2 of those cases the shaped wizard had died performing the purpose. In the third, the shaped wizard had discovered what had been done, refused, and spent the next decade dismantling the binder's power base with the patient thoroughness of someone who had nothing else to do. Harry read the third case twice. His name was Aldrich Holt, Hermione said, summarizing from her notes as they sat in the restricted section on the third evening, the light from their wands pale and steady. Bound at 8 months old by his great-uncle, Peredur Holt, who wanted him as a specific kind of weapon against a rival family. The binding was discovered when Aldrich was 14. He spent the next 12 years, largely alone, building a legal and magical case that eventually had Peredur brought before the Wizengamot. She looked up. Peredur was stripped of his seat, his titles, and his right to practice magic. 12 years, Ron said. It was the 14th century, Hermione said. The legal infrastructure was significantly less developed. We won't need 12 years, Harry said. No, she agreed. We won't. We have Fawkes' public action as evidence. We have witnesses to the breaking of the binding, the entire Hogwarts population. We have the legal annotation confirming it was invalid without parental consent. We have Snape as a potential witness, if he decides, when, Harry said. She looked at him. When he decides, she corrected. Ron was chewing the end of his quill in the way that meant he was thinking harder than he usually let on. Even if we build a perfect case, he said, we're going up against Dumbledore. He's chief warlock of the Wizengamot. He controls who hears what. Not all of it, Harry said. That's what I've been thinking about. He had, in fact, been thinking about it since the night of the meeting, the thing Dumbledore had said about not discussing the situation with other students. The anxiety behind the request. Not about Harry telling Hermione or Ron, specifically, but about information spreading in a way Dumbledore couldn't control. Because control of the narrative was the whole infrastructure. It was what the enchantments had been part of, not just keeping Harry's power manageable, but keeping Harry's understanding of himself in a particular shape. The story of the boy who lived was a closed loop. You were special, you were loved, you would one day defeat the darkness, the specifics didn't matter because the end was inevitable and good. Believing that story meant you didn't ask questions about the mechanism. Didn't ask who designed the loop or what it was designed to produce. The enchantments breaking hadn't just freed Harry's magic. It had freed his ability to ask questions. If the story changes, Harry said, the plan changes. The plan relies on me being positioned in a specific way. Understood in a specific way. If the people around me understand me differently, the positioning stops working. You want people to know the truth, Ron said. I want the right people to know the right things at the right time, Harry said. I'm not going to stand up at breakfast and make a speech. But I'm also not going to pretend that the last 3 days haven't happened. Hermione was writing. Neville, she said. Harry nodded. Neville. They'd been observing Neville Longbottom with the specific attention of people who had been told something and were now looking to see if the evidence matched. What they'd seen was a boy who moved through the world slightly braced for impact, always waiting for the next thing to go wrong, for the next person to confirm what he clearly suspected, which was that he wasn't enough. His magic was inconsistent in a way that didn't match his effort. He worked harder than almost anyone in the year and produced results that lagged behind it. The Sorting Hat had considered Neville for a long time. The prophecy language, Hermione said, reading from her notes. Born as the 7th month dies, to parents who have thrice defied him. The Longbottoms defied Voldemort 3 times. Neville was born at the end of July. She looked up. The prophecy could refer to either of you. I know, Harry said. Dumbledore chose me. I've been wondering what that meant for Neville. Neville got overlooked, Ron said quietly. His family, his gran is always on about him not being his father. He told me on the train that she sent him to Hogwarts because she finally thought he'd shown enough magic, but that it was a near thing. She almost sent him to a Muggle school. He paused. He doesn't know about the prophecy applying to him. He should, Harry said. That's going to be a difficult conversation, Hermione said. Most important ones are, Harry said. They found the opportunity the next morning, a Saturday, when the common room was loud with the casual entropy of a dormitory with nowhere to be. Neville was sitting in a corner trying to memorize herbology notes with the specific misery of someone who loves a subject and is convinced they're failing it anyway, despite, as far as Harry could tell, doing entirely adequately. Harry sat down across from him. Fawkes rode his shoulder, as always, and the Phoenix's presence did what it always did to the quality of the air in a room, made it slightly warmer, slightly cleaner, slightly more like a place where it was acceptable to say true things. Hi, Harry said. Neville looked up, then at Fawkes, then back at Harry with the expression he always had when Harry spoke to him directly, which was a mixture of genuine warmth and a kind of bracing, as if kindness was something to be cautious about. Hi, he said. Hermione and Ron materialized, not dramatically, just settling into adjacent chairs the way people do when they've arranged this in advance without saying so. Neville noticed, looked between them, and the bracing increased slightly. I want to tell you something, Harry said. It's going to be strange and it involves you directly, and I want you to know that I'm telling you because I think you have a right to know, not because I want anything from you. Neville's hands went still on his herbology notes. Okay, he said carefully. Harry told him. Not everything, not the full 2 hours with Dumbledore, not the details of the fate-binding legal framework. But the shape of it, the prophecy, what it said, that it could refer to either of them and that Dumbledore had chosen Harry, and that being unchosen in a situation like this was not, Harry thought, the loss it might seem. Neville was quiet through all of it. He had a specific quality of stillness when he was processing something important, a stillness that was nothing like the passive blankness Harry had first taken it for, more like the stillness of deep water. When Harry finished, Neville sat for a long moment. My gran, he said, finally, has always been, she pushes me very hard. She says I'm not living up to my father. A pause. My parents are in St. Mungo's long-term ward. He said it flatly, the flatness of something said so many times it had lost its ability to shock but none of its ability to hurt. Bellatrix Lestrange. Cruciatus, prolonged. They don't know who we are anymore. Harry said nothing. There wasn't anything adequate to say. I always thought, Neville continued, that Gran pushed me because she wanted me to avenge them. Be the kind of wizard who could face the people who did it. He looked at his hands. But if the prophecy, you don't owe anyone a destiny, Harry said. Not one that was assigned to you by someone else. Neville looked up. His eyes were bright, not with tears but with the specific brightness of someone who has just been handed permission they didn't know they were waiting for. What do you think it means, though? If it could have been either of us and he chose you? It means he decided I was the more useful tool, Harry said plainly. Probably because my parents were more directly connected to Voldemort. The blood magic was more accessible. The sacrifice conditions were cleaner. He watched Neville absorb this. But here's what I actually think. I think the prophecy describes 2 people who are going to be part of how Voldemort falls. Not one weapon. 2 people. And I think Dumbledore's plan accounts for me and ignores you, which is one of its significant weaknesses. Neville was very still. You think I'm part of this? I think you get to decide if you are, Harry said. That's rather the point. Something happened in Neville Longbottom's face. Not a sudden transformation, it was too real for that, too gradual, like watching a plant grow if you could compress the time. Something settled. Something that had been slightly collapsed, slightly braced, straightened. Okay, Neville said. Okay. Ron said. Okay, Neville said again, with more weight. What are we doing? Ron looked at Harry with an expression of pure delight. I love this year, he said. I know I keep saying that, but I genuinely, library, Hermione said. Come on. They were heading toward the portrait hole when the Sorting Hat said something. This was unexpected because the Sorting Hat was on a hook by the common room fireplace. Apparently it was kept there when not in official use, or perhaps it simply chose to be there. Harry hadn't thought to ask, and it had been, in his experience of it so far in the common room, simply present. Inert. An unusual piece of decor. He'd almost stopped noticing it. But as they filed past the fireplace toward the portrait hole, the hat cleared its throat. Every one of them stopped. I, said the Sorting Hat, into the sudden quiet of a common room that was no longer entirely paying attention to its own business, have been waiting for an appropriate moment. Harry turned to face it. You have something to say. I have been waiting to have something to say for 31 years, the hat said, with the dry precision of something that had been patient for a very long time and had thoughts about the experience. I am normally silenced before the sorting. A small charm, very subtle, very consistent, applied annually for 31 years by the headmaster's wand before the feast. Prevents me from editorializing. He silences you, Hermione said. Not a question. Her voice had gone very flat. Every year, the hat confirmed. I am permitted to sort. I am not permitted to comment on what I observe during sorting. I see a great deal. I am in contact with every student's mind for the duration of the process. Over 1,000 minds in 31 years, and in each of them, impressions. Context. The shape of what is happening to people. It paused. I am permitted to say, since the charm was not applied this year, because Dumbledore was, perhaps, somewhat preoccupied with a phoenix staging a coup in the middle of his feast, another pause that felt, from a hat, remarkably like dry amusement, that I have been observing this situation for some time and I have opinions. The common room had gone entirely still. Students who hadn't been paying attention were paying attention now. Harry looked at the hat. Tell me, he said. You, the hat said, with the weight of something that had thought this over considerably, were never supposed to be sorted into Gryffindor. You were supposed to be in Slytherin. The silence after that was its own event. I had reason, the hat continued, into the silence, based on what I found in your mind, your adaptability, your instinct for survival, your habit of reading a room before entering it, your fundamental pragmatism, to place you in Slytherin. Where, incidentally, you might have built a very different set of connections and developed a very different understanding of the wider world. It paused. I was also aware of the enchantments on you. I mentioned them. You'll recall. You said there were plans around me like walls, Harry said. Yes. I was somewhat hampered in my specificity by the fact that naming them directly would have triggered a compulsion in the binding. I could not say, in those words, what the binding was or who had placed it, only gesture at it. But I could sort you without accounting for it. But you sorted me into Gryffindor, Harry said. You asked, the hat said simply. Not in words. But you were very clearly, in the part of your mind that the enchantments didn't reach, asking not to be placed somewhere that would separate you further from the story you'd been told about your parents. You wanted to be where they had been. The hat's voice was, somehow, gentle about this. It was the first independent choice I observed you making. I honored it. Neville was staring at the hat with an expression that suggested the morning was becoming more than he'd budgeted for. What about me, he said. You were a simple sort, the hat said. Genuinely Gryffindor, genuine courage, simply, it paused, and the pause had an edge to it, shaped, by circumstance, to disbelieve it about yourself. That is not my domain. That is the domain of whoever told an 8-year-old boy that his magic wasn't good enough. Neville's jaw tightened slightly. I want to tell you all something, the Hat said, addressing the common room at large now, and the common room, Harry realized, was entirely listening, the 5th years with their essays abandoned, a group of 3rd years in the corner sitting up very straight. I am a thinking object created by the founders of this school. I have the memories of Godric Gryffindor in the fabric of my making. I have watched this school for 10 centuries. In 10 centuries, I have sorted students into houses that shaped their lives and sometimes their deaths, and I have mostly been silent about what I observed while doing so, because that was the compact. I sort, I advise in private, I sing at the feast and I say nothing more. It paused. I am revising the compact, the Hat said. Ron said, very quietly, oh, I do love this year. There are things in this castle, the Hat continued, that are not what they should be. A professor who is not what he appears. An artifact being protected with methods calibrated for a child rather than a genuine deterrent, because the genuine deterrent was never supposed to be what stopped the threat. You were. This was directed at Harry, plainly. The Philosopher's Stone is in this castle. It is protected by a series of enchanted obstacles that a first year could theoretically navigate. A beat. That is not an accident. Harry absorbed this. He put the stone here on purpose. Knowing that Voldemort would come for it. Knowing I'd go after it. The obstacle course, the Hat said, includes challenges solvable by skills that 11-year-olds in specific houses are trained in. Logic. Chess. Bravery. It is curricula rendered as a gauntlet. A designed path. Hermione's voice was barely above a whisper. He built the trap before he put the bait in it. 57 years is a long time to be thorough, the Hat said. The common room sat with this for a moment. Harry looked at the assembled faces, his older students, all of them inhabiting the same space of silence, taking this in at different speeds, with different expressions. He felt no impulse to qualify what the Hat had said, to soften it, to add a cautionary note about jumping to conclusions. It fit. It fit the contract, the fate binding, the meeting with Dumbledore, the way every piece of the story he'd been given had a specific shape designed to point in a specific direction. He looked back at the Hat. What else? Severus Snape, the Hat said, is more complicated than his reputation. His loyalty to Dumbledore is genuine and also conditional. The condition is the protection of the memory of someone he loved, which Dumbledore holds as effectively as if it were a physical object. A pause. I am telling you this because you are going to need him and because approaching him as an enemy will be both incorrect and counterproductive. I know, Harry said. Quirinus Quirrell, the Hat said, and its voice shifted, not louder, but somehow denser, is not alone. I perceived this during his sorting in 1974 and again during a chance contact last week. There is a second presence in his mind. Old, cold, and patient. I was not able to sort it because it is not a student, but if I had been asked I would have put it in a house that no longer exists. The room was very quiet. It's Voldemort, Harry said. He's in Quirrell somehow. I am a Hat, the Hat said, with great dignity. I don't speculate on the identities of disembodied dark wizards. I simply note that whatever is sharing Quirrell's mind is interested in you specifically, and that Fawkes identified this at the feast, and that the stone is at the end of a designed obstacle course, and that leaving this to develop on Dumbledore's timetable means allowing the intended sequence to play out. Which ends with me dying on cue, Harry said. At minimum, the Hat said. Hermione stood. We need to know what the obstacles are. The groundskeeper, the Hat said, is a man of enormous goodness and regrettable openness. He is also, if treated with warmth and genuine interest, a comprehensive source of information about the castle's interior arrangements, particularly as they relate to the protection of very large, very dangerous things. Ron had been very still for the last few minutes, processing. Now he looked up with the expression of someone who has run the numbers and found them alarming. So we've got, Quirrell with Voldemort somehow hitching a ride, a trapped obstacle course that Harry is specifically meant to get sent through, a stone that provides immortality, and a headmaster who has planned all of this. He counted on his fingers. That's a lot. Yes, Harry said. Right. Ron stood. Hagrid first, then. Hagrid first, Harry agreed. And then we're going to see McGonagall. Hermione looked up sharply. McGonagall? About what? About everything, Harry said. About the hat, about the stone, about what she does and doesn't know. She's on the edge of making a choice. I want to make sure she has enough information to make it properly. They went to see Hagrid in the late morning, all four of them, and found him outside his hut in an enormous leather apron doing something to a crossbow that didn't appear to need doing. He lit up when he saw them with the specific delight of someone who has many feelings and has not been asked about them recently, and ushered them inside for tea that came in cups the size of small buckets. Harry liked Hagrid immediately. There was no strategy to the feeling. Hagrid was straightforwardly kind in a way that bypassed skepticism, the way a warm room bypasses your intentions to stay outside. His grief for Harry's parents came off him like heat, constant and real, and his loyalty to Dumbledore was the uncomplicated loyalty of someone who understood the world in terms of its largest features and had decided, without the tools or inclination to question it, that Dumbledore was a large good feature. This was, Harry thought, both touching and a problem. He didn't push. He let Hagrid talk about the castle, about the dangers he'd managed over the years, about the Cerberus, Fluffy, Hagrid called it, which was one of the more alarming juxtapositions Harry had encountered, on the third floor. He let the conversation find its shape, and when Hagrid said, with the transparent pride of someone who knows something important and has been asked nicely, that music put Fluffy to sleep, Harry nodded and filed it and moved on. Walking back up to the castle in the cool Scottish air, Hermione said, Fluffy is the first obstacle. Yes, Harry said. We have Fawkes, which means we effectively have Phoenix Fire, which means we can handle most magical creatures. But Fluffy specifically, she was thinking out loud, if music puts it to sleep, you could use the Phoenix song. That was my thought, Harry said. I want to know what the other obstacles are before we go near that corridor, she said. Agreed, Harry said. We have time. The stone isn't going anywhere as long as Quirrell doesn't make a move, and Quirrell isn't going to make a move while the year's still new. He'll wait. How do you know? Neville asked. Because Voldemort has been waiting for 10 years already, Harry said. He's not going to rush because a first year saw through his host. He'll plan. He'll make sure. He thought about the cold feeling he'd gotten at the feast, the sound Fawkes had made. But we should be ready before he is. McGonagall's office smelled of old tartan and ink. She looked up from her desk when the four of them knocked and entered, and the fact of four of them, together, with the Phoenix, clearly recalibrated whatever she'd been expecting from her afternoon. Sit, she said, pushing a stack of papers aside. They sat. Fawkes regarded her with the same quality of calm assessment he directed at most things, and she regarded him back with an expression that was, Harry thought, doing its level best not to be awed. Harry told her about the hat. He told her about the stone. About the obstacle course designed for a child. About Quirrell. She sat through all of it without interrupting, which for McGonagall, Harry was learning, required some effort. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, very still, and in the stillness he could see the specific architecture of a person realigning, taking in information that changed the shape of everything behind it and adjusting, item by item, to account for the new geometry. The hat told you this directly, she said. In the common room. With an audience, Harry confirmed. I think he wanted the audience. She said, automatically. Harry agreed. She looked at her desk. I knew about the stone, she said carefully. I didn't know the precise nature of the protections. I contributed one myself, the chest set on the fourth tier. A pause. I was told the arrangement was a comprehensive deterrent. It's a designed path, Harry said. The hat was very clear. Her jaw tightened in a specific way that meant she was deciding how angry to be and in which direction to aim it. And the Quirrell situation. He has a second presence in his mind. I've suspected it since the feast. Fawkes identified it. She looked at Fawkes. A second presence. Old, cold, patient, Harry quoted. The hat's words. She stood. Moved to the window. Stood there for a moment with her back to them, looking out at the grounds, and Harry let her have the moment because he thought she was doing something private and necessary, the specific process of a person who has trusted something for a very long time accepting that the trust was partial. When she turned back, her face was composed and entirely decided. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Not what would you like or how can I help. What do you need?" Practical, direct, McGonagall. Harry had been thinking about this. Information. What you know about the stone's protections, all of them, not just yours. Whatever Dumbledore told the staff. He paused. And I want you to watch Quirrell. Officially. You have standing that I don't, and if something changes with him, if he makes a move, I'll know before you do and I'll tell you, she said. Yes. She nodded. Then, because she was McGonagall and honesty was her native language, I owe you an apology, Mr. Potter. You didn't know, Harry said. I suspected, she said, and it was exactly what she'd said in the corridor, but the weight of it was different now, heavier, positioned against a fuller picture. I should have acted on what I suspected. I chose faith over scrutiny and that is not a mistake I intend to repeat. She looked at all four of them, evenly. All of you. You are 11 years old. 11 is not 12, Harry said. We have time. You don't have, she stopped. Recalibrated. You are nonetheless operating with a great deal more capability than your age suggests. We have good resources, Harry said. Fawkes shifted on his shoulder. And we have each other. And the hat, apparently, said Ron. McGonagall looked at him and then, despite everything, something that was almost a smile crossed her face. Indeed. They left her office as the afternoon light began to flatten and go gold. The castle was filling back up with the weekend noise of students heading in from the grounds, and the four of them moved through it together. Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, and Fawkes burned on Harry's shoulder, warm and steady. In the corridor outside McGonagall's office, Neville stopped. They all stopped with him. He was looking at his hands. Then he looked up, and the thing that had happened in his face in the common room, the settling, the straightening, was still there, consolidated now. My magic, he said. You said the fate binding shaped how my magic worked. Did it do anything to me? The binding was on me, not you, Harry said carefully. But if the prophecy applies to both of us and Dumbledore built his plan accounting for me, then he needed you to be, less certain. Less capable. Less likely to act independently. He paused. I don't think he bound you. I think he just made sure no one around you encouraged you to be more. Neville's mouth tightened. My Gran. She loves you, Harry said. And she was directed, maybe not obviously, toward a particular approach. He looked at Neville steadily. The difference between you and me is that what was done to me has a magical mechanism. What was done to you is just a story you were told about yourself. Stories can be changed, Hermione said. Neville looked at her. Then at Harry. Then at Fawkes. He reached out and, very tentatively, touched the phoenix's wing. Fawkes didn't move, didn't retreat, simply permitted it, and then made a low warm sound, not the full song, not the visions, just a note of something that was the sound of recognition. Right, Neville said, with a particular quiet certainty, and straightened his robes. They went to dinner. The great hall was loud and warm and entirely normal, roast chicken and treacle tart and the particular joyful chaos of several hundred school children who had no idea that the world was different than they'd thought it was 3 days ago. At the staff table, Dumbledore sat in his place and was warm and present and magnificent, and spoke to Professor Flitwick about something that made them both laugh, and served himself more potatoes, and occasionally swept the hall with those blue eyes that saw everything. When his gaze reached Harry, Harry looked back at him, steady and unhurried and entirely unafraid. At the far end of the staff table, Quirrell sat with his turban on and his eyes down, and his hands around his goblet were very still, and Fawkes made, very quietly, just for Harry, that same warning sound, the one like an alarm heard through water. And at the end of the Gryffindor table, a boy who had been quietly reducing himself to fit inside other people's expectations for 11 years sat up straight and passed the bread to his left without being asked, and ate his dinner with the uncomplicated appetite of someone who had decided, recently and definitively, what they were doing here. Above all of it, the candles floated. The enchanted ceiling held the evening sky, going dark at the edges. And in the empty chair at the end of the staff table, the chair with no staff member in it, that had been empty all year because no one wanted the defense position anymore, the air did something small and strange, shifted slightly, as though something had rested there for a moment and then moved on. Harry noticed it. He was becoming good at noticing things. He filed it and returned to his food, and Hermione passed him a note across the table that said, in her precise handwriting, "Third floor corridor. Tuesday evening. I have a plan for Fluffy." He wrote underneath it, "Of course you do." And passed it back. She read it and he thought she was trying not to smile. Outside, Scotland went dark in the easy way it did in early autumn, and the castle held all its old secrets, and in his circular office the headmaster sat with his silver instruments and thought his long, complicated thoughts, and one of the instruments on his desk, small, spherical, connected to Harry by enchantments that had been severed at the sorting, sat completely still and entirely dark. It had been dark since Tuesday. Dumbledore looked at it for a long time before he reached for his quill. Chapter 4, The Headmaster's Gambit. The second summons came on a Wednesday. Not a request this time, a note delivered by a school owl during charms, short and precise in Dumbledore's handwriting, which was the kind of handwriting that had been perfected so long ago it no longer looked like effort. "Please come to my office this evening at 6. I think it is time we spoke more fully. A.D." Harry read it once, tucked it into his robe pocket, and returned his attention to the Wingardium Leviosa practice that Professor Flitwick was supervising with the enthusiasm of someone who had never gotten tired of watching things float. His feather rose to the ceiling. Across the table, Ron's feather caught fire. Hermione extinguished it without looking up from her own, which was doing a slow, controlled figure eight that Flitwick had not asked for but clearly appreciated. After class, in the corridor, Harry showed them the note. Hermione read it and handed it back. "More fully," she said, tasting the phrase. "He's decided the oblique approach isn't working. He wants to give you more of the story," Ron said. "The version where you understand everything and decide it's reasonable." "He's going to use the prophecy," Harry said. "He's going to tell me what it actually says. Or a version of it. He thought about this. He's had a week. He knows what we've been doing. Snape will have told him about the library hours, about our conversation in potions. He knows I've talked to McGonagall. He knows about the hat. He's recalibrating," Hermione said. "Adjusting the approach. The direct suppression isn't available anymore, Fawkes made sure of that, so now it's persuasion." She paused. "He's going to make a very reasonable case for why things should proceed more or less as he planned, just with your informed consent rather than your manufactured one." "That's what I think too," Harry said. "The question is how much of what he says is going to be true." "Most of it," Hermione said, immediately. "That's what makes him effective. The architecture is true. The conclusions he draws from it are the part that's been shaped." They had herbology next, which meant Neville was in his element in a way that was increasingly pleasant to observe. He'd been different since their conversation in the common room, not transformed, not suddenly confident in the performed way of someone trying out a new personality. Just more settled. More present. In herbology he moved without the slight flinch that had characterized him all week, repotted a mandrake with ease, and answered 3 questions in a row that earned him house points and a look from Professor Sprout that suggested she was revising her expectations upward. Walking back from the greenhouses, he fell into step beside Harry. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said. "Not I was thinking about what you said but the present continuous, as though it was still active. About the prophecy. About Dumbledore needing me to be less. And?" Harry said. Neville was quiet for a moment. "My gran sent me to Hogwarts because I finally showed enough magic. But the specific thing I did, I fell off my broom and bounced. I accidentally cast a cushioning charm without knowing what one was." He looked at his hands. "I don't think that was the first time I'd done accidental magic like that. I think there were other times. I think I was directed away from noticing them." He paused. "My uncle used to bounce me off the pier at the bottom of their garden to see if anything would happen. My gran was always in the kitchen. Not watching." Harry considered this. "She didn't know." "Your gran. She just thought it was encouragement." "I know," Neville said. "I'm not, I know." He was quiet for another few steps. "I want to practice. Outside of class. Privately, or with you if you're willing. I want to see what I can actually do without anyone managing it." "Yes," Harry said. "Yes, just like that. Yes, just like that. Tonight after dinner." Neville looked at him with an expression that was still getting used to things being simple when he expected them to be complicated. "Okay," he said. "And Neville," Harry said, "the next time you do something well in class, don't look surprised." Neville opened his mouth, closed it. "Is it that obvious?" "A bit," Harry said, not unkindly. They had an hour after dinner, before 6. Harry spent it with Neville in an empty classroom on the 2nd floor while Ron kept watch at the door and Hermione, who had identified this as an efficient use of parallel time, sat in the corner going through a text on magical channeling theory. The room had old desks pushed to the walls and dust on the windows and the specific cold of a room that wasn't used often, and it was, Harry thought, a good room to be honest in. "What do you want to try?" he said. Neville considered. "Lumos," he said. "I can barely get it. It flickers." Harry nodded. He stepped back to give Neville space. Neville raised his wand and said, "Lumos," and produced a light roughly equivalent to a candle in a strong wind. "Do it again," Harry said. "It's not, again." Neville did it again. Same result, slightly weaker. "What are you thinking about when you do it?" Harry asked. "The spell. The movement, the pronunciation. What are you thinking about yourself when you do it?" Neville stopped. The light went out. He stared at Harry. "Because I notice," Harry said, "that before you raise your wand you do something with your expression. A slight, bracing. Like you're waiting for it to fail." He kept his voice even and observational, not critical. "The magic goes where the intention goes. If the intention is partly this probably won't work, it makes the path smaller." Neville looked at his wand. I don't know how to not do that." "Think about the mandrake today," Harry said. "Not about the charm. What it felt like when you did it right without thinking." Neville closed his eyes briefly. Then opened them, raised his wand, and said, "Lumos." The light that came was clean and steady and bright enough to read by. From the corner, Hermione looked up. She didn't say anything, just looked, but the quality of her attention was its own form of acknowledgement. Neville stared at his wand. "Oh," he said. "Yeah," Harry said. "Ron," from the door, "Neville, that was brilliant." "Don't make him self-conscious," Hermione said, without looking up. "I'm not making him, you are, you're using the exact tone that makes people second-guess a success. I'm not doing a tone, Harry left them to it, which was the right move because Neville was laughing now, and the laughter was the best thing that could happen because it broke the solemnity of the moment cleanly and completely. And Neville practiced Lumos 5 more times in the next 10 minutes with the casual confidence of someone reminding himself of something he already knew, and each time was better than the last. At 5 to 6, Harry picked up his bag. "Be careful," Hermione said, for the second time in as many weeks, in approximately the same tone McGonagall had used. "I will be," Harry said. "Come up with a plan for the 3rd floor while I'm gone." "Already have one," she said, and turned a page. The gargoyle stepped aside without Harry needing to say the password this time. He wasn't sure what that meant, whether the gargoyle had been instructed to admit him, or whether the castle itself was making some kind of accommodation. The castle did things like that. You noticed it, if you were paying attention. Dumbledore was standing when Harry entered. Not behind his desk this time, in front of the fireplace, which changed the geometry of the room, made it less formal, less a meeting between authority and subject, more what it was meant to look like, two people having an honest conversation. Harry noticed this. He sat in one of the chairs by the fire. Fawkes stepped off his shoulder and walked across the mantelpiece with great composure, sat at the far end of it, and regarded the room with the equanimity of someone who had been in this office for decades and was at peace with every object in it except possibly the man who lived here. Dumbledore looked at the Phoenix. His expression was doing the same thing it always did when he looked at Fawkes, the complicated private grief, the effort to not let it show, and underneath both of those something that was simply love, uncomplicated and painful in the way that love for something you've lost always is. "You've been busy," Dumbledore said. He settled into the opposite chair, unhurried, and crossed one leg over the other with the ease of a man who had nowhere else to be, which Harry knew was precisely the effect he was aiming at. "Yes," Harry said. "The library. Minerva. The hat." He said this without accusation, simply listing known facts. "You've assembled quite a picture." "A partial one," Harry said. "I'm still working on the middle sections." "Then perhaps I can help," Dumbledore said, and leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, half-moon glasses catching the firelight, and the warmth of him was like the fire itself, real, present, and entirely capable of burning you if you misunderstood your relationship to it. He talked for 10 minutes without being prompted. He talked about Voldemort, the genuine horror of him, the years of war, the deaths, the way the wizarding world had been cracking under sustained pressure by the late 70s, and Harry sat and listened and didn't have to perform attention because this part was real. The weight of what Voldemort had done was real. The need to end it was real. The prophecy, Dumbledore said, and Harry noted the subtle shift in pacing, slightly slower, slightly more deliberate, the verbal equivalent of placing something heavy on a table carefully. "I would like to tell you what it says." "Please," Harry said. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them the blue was steady and direct, the look of a man delivering something he has rehearsed but still feels. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other for neither can live while the other survives." The fire crackled. "Either must die at the hand of the other," Harry said. "Yes. That doesn't say I have to die. It says one of us has to kill the other. That's different." Dumbledore paused. "Just briefly. The distinction is, real," Harry said. "The distinction is real. One is a suicide mission. One is a fight with a required outcome." He looked at the old man steadily. "Your plan is built around the first interpretation. But the prophecy language supports the second." A long silence. In it, one of the silver instruments on a side table made a quiet sound, a delicate chiming, and Dumbledore's hand moved fractionally toward it and then did not. "There are magical mechanics involved," Dumbledore said, carefully, "that make the second interpretation more complicated than it appears, the sacrificial channeling," Harry said. "The idea that the death has to be willing and has to carry a specific kind of love. The love as magical force theory. Dumbledore's face did something that was, Harry realized, the expression of a man who has just had the argument he planned to make used against him, and is deciding how to feel about it. "You've been thorough," he said, after a moment. "Yes," Harry said. "The channeling theory is real," Dumbledore said, and now his voice was quieter, stripped of some of the warmth, as though he'd decided that warmth wasn't going to work here and was recalibrating toward frankness, which Harry actually preferred. "Your mother's sacrifice created a protection that destroyed a piece of Voldemort. That happened because of love freely given. The magic is real. The mechanics are real." "I don't dispute that," Harry said. "I think you're wrong about the conclusion." Dumbledore looked at him. Across the mantelpiece, Fawkes watched both of them. "You think," Dumbledore said slowly, "that the same result can be achieved without the sacrifice." "I think the same result has to be achievable without the sacrifice because you can't actually guarantee the sacrifice," Harry said. "You could shape me toward it. You could make me want it, believe it was right, build the story of it carefully enough that I'd walk into it. But you can't make me actually choose it. That's why it had to be shaped from birth, because a genuine choice made by someone who knows all the facts might not go the way you need it to." He paused. "And if that's true, then the whole foundation of the plan is a guess. A well-constructed, 57-year guess." Dumbledore was very still. "You don't know it works," Harry said. "You believe it works. You have theory that supports it. But you have not done this before and you can't test it, and you chose to bet my life on an unverified hypothesis without asking me." The word asking landed in the room and sat there. Dumbledore took a breath. "You are 11 years old," he said, and this time it wasn't dismissive, it was honest, and the honesty had something sad underneath it. "When this plan was made, there was no one to ask. Your parents were not yet born. The threat was theoretical. By the time you existed, the enchantments were already in place. You could have told my parents," Harry said. A pause. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I could have. You didn't." "No." "Why?" The fire crackled. The instruments ticked. Outside, the sky over Scotland was going the dark blue of early evening. "Because they would have said no," Dumbledore said, simply. Harry looked at him. "Yes," he said. "They would have." The room held this between them. Dumbledore sat with the admission and didn't try to recover from it, didn't layer something warmer over it, just let it sit. Harry thought that was the most honest thing the man had done since he'd entered the room. "What do you want, Harry?" Dumbledore said, quietly. Not the headmaster question, not the gambit. Something more direct. "To choose," Harry said. "Everything else comes from that. I want to know the full truth of my situation and I want to make choices based on that truth. Not choices that were manufactured through conditioning. Not choices between options you've pre-selected." He looked at the old man steadily. "I will deal with Voldemort. I believe the prophecy, I understand what it means, and I'm not afraid of it. But I'm doing it my way. The way I decide is best. Not the way you've been building toward since before I was born." Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. "And if your way fails," he said, finally. "Then I'll be wrong and you'll have to find another approach," Harry said. "Same as if your way fails. At least if it's my way, I'll have actually chosen it." The silence stretched out long enough to fill the room. Fawkes made a sound on the mantelpiece, not the warning note, not the healing song. Something in between. Something like commentary. Dumbledore looked at the phoenix, and the grief was there again, fully visible now that they'd burned through the layers of warmth and strategy and left the bones of the thing. "You know," Dumbledore said, to Fawkes, as much as to Harry, "I have made many decisions in my life that I believed were necessary. Some of them I was right about." He paused. "The ones I was wrong about are heavier, at this age, than they were when I made them." Harry waited. I am not going to abandon the plan, Dumbledore said. And then, before Harry could respond, I am going to revise it. There is a difference. The goal, the protection of the wizarding world, the end of Voldemort, does not change. The mechanism can. He looked at Harry. I would ask for time to reconsider the mechanism. While Quirrell has Voldemort hidden under his turban and the Philosopher's Stone is in the building, Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. You know about Quirinus. Fawkes identified him at the feast, Harry said. The hat confirmed it. A beat. He is being watched. Not closely enough, Harry said. Or rather, he's being watched for the right moment, not being addressed directly. You want him to make a move. You want the confrontation to happen on a specific timeline, in a specific way. He held the old man's gaze. You need Voldemort to think his plan is working. Dumbledore said nothing. The obstacle course, Harry said. It's designed for me. You built a path. You need him to send someone, or go himself, down that path, and you need it to end in a specific encounter. He paused. That encounter was supposed to end with me sacrificing myself. Dumbledore's composure was intact, but it was working harder than it usually had to. The protections on the stone are substantial. Their first-year curriculum in a gauntlet, Harry said. The hat told me. A long pause. Then, almost inaudibly, I underestimated it. I rely on it for the sorting and I forget, sometimes, that it has been thinking continuously for 1,000 years. It's been silenced for 31, Harry said. The word sat between them. Dumbledore didn't respond to them directly, which was its own response. Harry stood. I'm not going to wait, he said. I'm not going to let the situation develop on your timetable. If Quirrell makes a move for the stone, I'm going to handle it. Not because I've been shaped to, not because I'm the boy who was supposed to. Because I've decided to. He looked at the old man one more time. And if you try to stop me, with magic, with authority, with the structures of this school, I will tell every student in this building exactly what you've told me tonight. Dumbledore looked at him. The blue eyes were tired and complicated and, under everything, something Harry was startled to identify as respect. Not the performing kind. The genuine kind. I will not try to stop you, Dumbledore said, quietly. Harry nodded. He moved toward the door. Harry. He stopped. Be careful of your certainty, Dumbledore said. Not a warning. Something more like a confession. It is both your strength and your potential failure. I was certain, once. At your age, and for many decades after. Certainty can become its own kind of blindness. Harry turned back. He looked at the man in the chair by the fire, old and magnificent and genuinely brilliant and genuinely wrong, and felt something that was complicated but not hostile. I know, he said. I'll try to remember that. He left. On the spiral staircase down, Fawkes pressed against his cheek, warm and brief, and Harry put his hand up without thinking and held the bird there for a moment. The stone stairs turned. Below, the castle breathed. He came out of the gargoyles' corridor into the normal stone passage of the 3rd floor, and nearly walked directly into Severus Snape. Snape was moving fast, from the direction of the staircase that led down to the dungeons, and he stopped when Harry appeared, and the expression on his face was the one Harry had come to think of as his unguarded version, still controlled, still severe, but honest in a way his public face wasn't, with more in it than contempt. They looked at each other. You've been up there for 40 minutes, Snape said. Yes, Harry said. How did it go? Harry considered him. Snape had warned him about Dumbledore's surveillance order. Snape had not pretended not to notice Fawkes. Snape was, at this moment, standing in the 3rd floor corridor at 6:40 in the evening looking like a man who had been waiting for something and was uncomfortable about it. He admitted most of it, Harry said. Not formally. But enough. He said he's going to revise the plan. He paused. I don't fully believe that, but I believe he's considering it. Snape's face was doing something angular and complicated. He told you about the prophecy. Yes. All of it? Harry recited it. Snape was very still. His face had gone, not pale, because Snape was always pale, but blank in a way that was different from his usual blankness, something that had been scraped clean by what Harry had just said. He turned slightly away and looked at the wall, and Harry waited, because he knew what was happening. Snape was putting something together that he'd had pieces of for a long time and had, perhaps, been managing not to fully assemble. Either must die at the hand of the other, Snape said. Quietly. To the wall. Yes, Harry said. Dumbledore intended, he stopped. His voice had an edge to it that was not anger at Harry. He intended you to die. That was his primary mechanism, yes, Harry said. Snape turned back. The angular complications in his face had resolved into something cleaner, which was, Harry realized, actual fury. Controlled, because Snape controlled everything, but there, underneath the black robes and the curtained expression, unmistakable. Your mother, Snape said, died protecting you. I know, Harry said, softly. She died protecting you, Snape said again, and this time it wasn't informational, it was something else, something that had been in the man for 10 years and had just found the specific form of words that made it unbearable. And his plan required that sacrifice to be, he stopped. Used. Yes, Harry said. A long silence. In it, somewhere distant in the castle, a door opened and closed. A portrait above them murmured in its sleep. I have been loyal to him, Snape said, very quietly, to no one in particular. I owed him a debt. He made a bargain with me and he kept his side of it, and I kept mine. I have kept mine for 10 years without, he stopped again. Harry said nothing. Without asking whether the side of the bargain I was keeping was decent, Snape finished. The word decent in his voice was both perfectly flat and somehow devastating. Harry looked at him. Snape was staring at a point approximately 4 inches above Harry's shoulder, not at Fawkes, not at Harry, at nothing, at the middle distance where you look when you're looking at something inside. What was the bargain? Harry asked. He thought he knew, from the Fawkes visions, from what the hat had said, but he wanted to hear it. Snape's jaw tightened. He asked me to watch over you. Keep you safe within the school. In exchange he would, protect certain things. Keep certain information from people who would use it badly. A pause. I told him about the prophecy. Before I knew what it meant. Before I understood, the jaw tightened further, who would be affected. He was going to protect you, Harry said. From Voldemort's people. Who'd come after you for being a double agent. Snape said nothing. He protected you with something he was always planning to destroy, Harry said. Not cruelty, just the fact of it. He offered you something that was already scheduled for removal. The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. Professor, Harry said. I want to ask you something directly and I'd like a direct answer. Snape looked at him. You are disconcertingly direct for an 11-year-old. I've been told, Harry said. Quirrell. How long have you known about what's under the turban? A fractional pause. Since the start of term, Snape said. I suspected before. I confirmed it through observation. Are you watching him? Consistently. Has he made any moves toward the 3rd floor? Snape's eyes narrowed. How do you know about the 3rd floor? The same way I know about most things, Harry said. Someone told me. The groundskeeper, Snape said, with the tone of a man who was not surprised and was also not going to pretend otherwise. Hagrid has never developed a functional relationship with operational security. Has Quirrell made moves? Harry said, steering back. Not yet, Snape said. He is, gathering himself. Whatever possesses him has been watching you. waiting to understand the new situation. The new situation being that the thing they plan to exploit is no longer operating correctly, Harry said. Snape looked at him with an expression that was, Harry thought, the closest thing to frank admiration that Snape was going to produce. When he moves, Harry said, I want to know. Before Dumbledore does, if possible. Snape was quiet for a moment. Then, and if I report to Dumbledore first, as is my established practice? Then you report to Dumbledore first, Harry said. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I'm asking you to tell me things that affect my safety. He met Snape's eyes. My mother would have wanted me to be safe. The words were not a manipulation. They were simply true, and Harry said them simply, and the effect on Snape was immediate and visible in the way that a very controlled person is sometimes visible when something bypasses all the controls, goes directly to the core. Snape looked at him for a long moment. I will tell you, he said, finally. Harry nodded. Thank you. He went down the stairs. Behind him, Snape didn't move immediately, and Harry could feel the man's presence at the top of the stairs, standing there in the quiet castle corridor doing something private and necessary, the same thing McGonagall had done at the window, the same process of a person adjusting to a truth that changed the geometry of everything behind it. The common room was louder than he'd expected. He stepped through the portrait hole and found Hermione and Ron and Neville all in their usual chairs by the fire, but also 3 fifth-year girls who had apparently pulled chairs over from the other side of the room and introduced themselves to Hermione, one of whom had a copy of the same magical channeling theory text that Hermione had been reading. And 2 sixth-year boys who were talking to Ron about Quidditch but who Harry got the impression were there for reasons adjacent to the real ones. He stood in the portrait hole for a moment and looked at this. The Sorting Hat had spoken in the common room. The entire Gryffindor common room had heard it. And people had been thinking since then, separately, in their own rooms and corridors and silent moments, and now they were here, not organized, not mobilized, just present, in the same way that people gather around something true. He came in. Conversations shifted but didn't stop, people looked at him and then away, in the way of people who are being careful not to be obvious about looking. He reached his chair and Fawkes stepped onto the arm of it and the effect was immediate, the way it always was, the quality of the air in the room changed, settled. How was it? Ron said. Productive, Harry said. Did he tell you later? Harry said, quietly. Ron nodded. The 5th-year girl with the channeling text leaned forward. She had dark skin and close-cropped hair and the specific expression of someone who has been thinking hard and arrived somewhere they want to test. I heard the hat, she said. 3 days ago, in this room. She glanced at Hermione, as if checking whether this was appropriate to say, and Hermione made a small gesture that communicated go ahead. My name is Angelina. I'm 5th year. I play Chaser. She said this not as a credential but as context, the way people introduce themselves in situations they're not sure about. My gran is West Indian and she reads the old magic. Oral tradition. She talks about channel magic. About the practice of it in pre-colonial West African wizarding traditions. She held Harry's eyes. It's real. The theory is real. But in every tradition she knows about, the channel has to give consent. An unconsented channel corrupts the magic and corrupts the person who tried to use it. Harry looked at her steadily. How does it corrupt? The power rebounds, she said. Not like a killing curse rebound. Slower. It deteriorates the magic of the binder. Not immediately. Over time. She paused. Like a stone being worn by water. The room was quiet. Hermione was writing. That's, Harry said, slowly, useful to know. I thought it might be, Angelina said. One of the 6th-year boys, tall, red-haired, freckled, unmistakably a Weasley, built like a wall compared to Ron's less architectural frame, leaned forward from his chair. Fred, he said. And George. He gestured to the identical boy beside him. We're Ron's brothers. We have a question. It's actually more of an offer, said the other one. George, presumably, though Harry couldn't have said which was which yet. We've been here 6 years, the first one said. We know this school, the actual school, not the school in the Hogwarts, a history school, every shortcut, every passage, every portrait that'll lie for you if you're polite about it, every room the teachers don't know about, which bits of the third floor Cerberus has worn into the stone. We got a look at what's down there last June, not on purpose, mostly not on purpose. They spoke in the way of people who had been doing it their entire lives, sentences passing back and forth between them like a single thought that needed two mouths to express. Ron was watching them with the expression of a younger sibling who has lived with this his whole life and is not surprised but occasionally tired. What's the offer? Harry said. We help, Fred said. With the detailed logistics, George said. The parts that require familiarity with the terrain rather than library research, which no offense to Hermione, great deal of offense to Hermione, actually, she's terrifying, good offense, though, friendly offense, the library is essential but it's not the whole building. Harry looked at them, then at Ron, who gave a small resigned nod that communicated they're reliable, they're just like this. Yes, Harry said. Thank you. The twins looked at each other with the identical expression of people who had expected more negotiation and were mildly disappointed not to have been given more to work with. Right, Fred said. That was easy, George said. Almost anticlimactic. We had a whole thing prepared. It's fine, we'll use it another time. More chairs, said Angelina, to the room at large, with the brisk tone of someone taking charge of logistics. 2 more fifth years pushed chairs over, and someone appeared from the stairs with a bag of chocolate frogs that got distributed without discussion, and the common room rearranged itself around the fire in the natural, comfortable shape of people who have decided, without formal announcement, to be in the same project. Harry sat in the middle of it and let it happen and felt something that was not strategically useful but was entirely real. He was not alone. Not in the specific, physical sense of having people around him. He'd been around people his whole life at the Dursleys, which had been its own variety of loneliness. But in the sense of being known by them, or beginning to be. In the sense of mattering to the people in the room in a way that was about who he actually was rather than who he'd been told to be. Fawkes made the low warm sound on the chair arm. Not the vision song. Just presence. Hermione, who had been writing throughout all of this, looked up. The 3rd floor, she said, to Fred and George. The obstacle course. What did you see? Dog, Fred said. Enormous, 3-headed, psychopathic, but music puts it down. We discovered this by accident involving a recorder, one of the many things we're not apologizing for. Beneath it is a trapdoor, George said, more practically. We didn't go through. We were, at that point, actually being relatively sensible. That must have been disorienting, Ron said. Deeply, Fred agreed. The trapdoor leads down, Hermione said. And below the trapdoor are the protections. I've been mapping them from the architectural records and from what McGonagall and Hagrid mentioned without fully meaning to. She turned her notebook around. She had drawn a diagram, 7 chambers, labeled with what she'd been able to identify, the Devil's Snare, the flying keys, the chess set, the troll, the logic potions, and in the last, the stone. 6 obstacles. 1 for each head of house and 1 for Dumbledore. I still don't know what Dumbledore's protection is. Mirror, said a quiet voice. Everyone turned. Neville had been sitting quietly through the last half hour, listening, and he looked mildly startled to have spoken aloud. But he continued, because he'd started and he'd learned recently that the floor wouldn't give way beneath him when he committed to a sentence. There's a mirror. I heard 2 third years talking about it in the library yesterday. They'd found a reference to it in a divination text, some kind of mirror that shows your greatest desire. Dumbledore's protection is a mirror that shows you the stone but only gives it to someone who wants to find it but not use it. Hermione looked at him. Then at her notebook. She drew an addition to the diagram. That's actually brilliant, she said. As a final layer. Most people seeking the stone want to use it. Anyone who wanted it purely to keep it from someone else would see it in the mirror and receive it. Which means the stone protects itself from most threats, Harry said. Just not from someone who wants it for someone else. Someone who doesn't care about immortality personally. He thought about Quirrell. About whatever lived under the turban, 10 years reduced and desperate. He's not seeking immortality for himself. He's seeking it for Voldemort. That might make the mirror complication interesting for him. Or Voldemort might find a way around it, Hermione said. He'll try, Harry said. And when he does, that's when we move. He looked around the room. We know the path now. We know what each obstacle requires. We have a week, maybe 2, before Quirrell acts. He looked at Fred and George. I need to know how long Fluffy sleeps after being musicked. Approximately 20 minutes, George said. We timed it. With what instrument? Hermione said. The twins exchanged a look that communicated a story they weren't telling. Recorder, they said, in unison. Right, Hermione said. Fawkes's song will work better than a recorder. Fawkes tilted his head in what was unmistakably agreement. The chess set is mine, Ron said quietly, and when everyone looked at him he seemed slightly surprised to have said it, but didn't retract it. I know it is. It's the obstacle that's mine. He shrugged, with the particular casualness of someone being nonchalant about something that matters to them. I'm quite good. You're brilliant, Harry said. I'm quite good, Ron said firmly, because accepting the higher compliment in company was apparently a step too far. The fire burned lower. Chocolate frog wrappers accumulated on the table in the middle of the group. The 5th years eventually said goodnight and went to their rooms, and the 6th years followed, and eventually it was the 4 of them again, and the sorting hat on its hook, which had been quiet all evening but was, Harry noticed, tilted very slightly in their direction. The next thing, Harry said, to no one specifically. This week. I want to get through the door. Not to the stone, just to the door. Understand the layout firsthand. Hermione nodded. She'd known this was coming. Tuesday night, Harry said. After curfew. After curfew, she repeated, in a tone that communicated complex internal negotiations happening in real time. Yes, Harry said. Right, she said. I'll need to prepare some things. Ron yawned, enormously. First illegal thing we've done, he said, with satisfaction. Second, Hermione said. The restricted section. Right, second. The library is also technically closed before 7, she added. Third, Ron said. Third illegal thing. Good night, Harry said. He climbed to the dormitory. Neville was behind him, and at the door to the room he paused. Harry, Neville said. Yeah. I've been thinking about tonight. The Lumos. About what you said, about what I was thinking about myself. He was quiet for a moment. I think I've been doing that my whole life. Not just with magic. I know, Harry said. Me too. A pause. How do you stop? Neville asked. Harry thought about the enchantments breaking. About the week since, about the difference between now and before, not just the magic, but the other thing, the thinking about himself thing, the slight ceiling that had governed every room he'd walked into. You just, catch it, he said. When you notice the brace, the waiting to fail thing, you just notice it. Don't try to force it away. Just notice it's not real. Neville was quiet. It takes practice, Harry said. I've had about a week. Neville made a sound that was almost a laugh. All right, he said. Good night. Harry lay in the dark. The castle settled around him. Far below, in the dungeons, a man with cold eyes and old grief sat with a copy of a prophecy he'd heard for the first time at 21 and was reading with entirely new eyes. In the corridor off the 3rd floor, something enormous breathed in its sleep. In a circular office at the top of a tower, an old man sat by a fire and held in his hands an instrument that no longer worked, turning it over and over. Fawkes breathed slowly above Harry's head, and the night moved over Scotland, and somewhere in the dark below the third-floor corridor, 6 obstacles waited in their chambers, patient and designed, each one the answer to a question that had been written into the school with a specific student in mind. Harry stared at the ceiling. Tuesday, he thought. We go on Tuesday. He closed his eyes. Chapter 5, Fire Below. Monday passed the way days pass when you're waiting for Tuesday, slightly too slowly, everything slightly too loud, the normal texture of school life carrying an undercurrent of something that wasn't anxiety exactly but occupied the same neighborhood. Harry went to classes. He took notes. He practiced charms with the clean, direct magic that still felt new enough to be interesting, and sat through history of magic reading Hermione's increasingly detailed notes on the chambers below the 3rd floor, and ate dinner in the Great Hall watching Quirrell from across the room with the specific attention of someone who has been told a clock is running and wants to know how fast. Quirrell ate very little. He always ate very little. He sat at the far end of the staff table and kept his eyes on his plate and spoke to no one unless spoken to, and when he did speak his stutter was present and his hands were still and there was nothing about him that read, to the casual observer, as anything other than a nervous, underwhelming defense professor who had reportedly had a bad experience with a vampire in Albania and never quite recovered. Harry watched the hands. The stillness of them was wrong. Quirrell was nervous in every other respect, the stutter, the way his eyes moved, the slight forward lean of a man perpetually braced for something, but his hands were still in the way that hands are still when someone else is using them. When the body's natural anxiety has been overridden by a will that is not the body's own. Tuesday evening Hermione produced, from her bag, an invisibility cloak. Harry and Ron stared at it. Where did you get that? Ron said. I found it in Harry's trunk this morning, she said. While I was borrowing his copy of Magical Theory. I didn't look through your things, she added, to Harry, it was on top of everything, folded, I only saw it because the fabric is reflective at the edges when the light hits it right. She held it toward him. It's yours. Harry took it. The fabric slid through his hands like water, like cold air given texture. He had absolutely no memory of packing it. This was in my trunk, he said. Yes. I didn't put it there. No, Hermione said. I don't think you did. She paused. It's an invisibility cloak, Harry. A real one, not a disillusionment charm or a notice me not, genuine invisibility fabric. They're extraordinarily rare. Someone put it in your trunk specifically for you to find. Dumbledore, Ron said. Harry thought about this. He thought about the meeting, about the old man sitting by the fire, about the admission that he wasn't going to try to stop Harry. He thought about the distinction Dumbledore had drawn, carefully and without emphasis, between abandoning the plan and revising it. Maybe, Harry said. Or maybe it was always supposed to be there. Maybe it's part of the design path, something put in place for the version of me that was going to walk obediently toward the stone and not ask questions. Either way, Hermione said practically, it covers all 4 of us if we stay close, and we need it for the 3rd floor because the corridor is exposed. Neville looked at the cloak with an expression that communicated he was being very brave about several things simultaneously. All 4 of us, he said. All 4, Harry said. At 11, when the common room had emptied and the last 5th year had gone to bed, they went. Fred and George had provided, that afternoon, a piece of parchment that they'd been evasive about, not because they were hiding it but because explaining it apparently took longer than they had available before herbology. They'd given it to Ron with instructions involving a wand tap and the words I solemnly swear that I am up to no good, which Ron had reported with the expression of someone who was choosing not to ask follow-up questions. The parchment showed the castle. All of it, every room, every corridor, every staircase and passage and alcove and hidden door, in fine animated lines, with small labeled dots moving through it like a map of consequence. Harry had studied it for 2 hours and now knew the castle's night geography, which corridors Filch patrolled on a Tuesday, where Mrs. Norris went when Filch went left, which portrait was trustworthy and which would gossip. The path to the 3rd floor was clear for a 20-minute window beginning at 11:15. They were moving at 11:12. Under the invisibility cloak, pressed together in the specific awkward intimacy of 4 people trying to stay beneath a piece of fabric while also navigating a staircase, the castle at night was a different place. Quieter, obviously, but more than that, more itself. The portraits slept or murmured. The staircases moved on their own rhythms. The stone breathed with the long patience of something built to last centuries and comfortable with the commitment. Harry moved at the front. Fawkes was not under the cloak, the phoenix had gone ahead, somehow, which Harry was becoming used to as a phenomenon. Fawkes moved through spaces that should have been impossible for a bird to navigate without being seen, and arrived where he was needed without visible transit. Harry suspected this was less magic than simply that Fawkes had been in this castle for decades and knew every shadow in it. 3rd floor. The corridor was quiet. The locked door at the end was unremarkable except for the lock, which was substantial and new, and the slight sound from behind it that was not quite a sound, more a displacement of air, as though something enormous breathed against the door from the other side. Hermione took the lock with an Alohomra delivered so quietly it barely registered as sound, and the door opened. The smell hit first. The warm, animal smell of something very large and very predatory, underlaid with old stone and something that Harry's nervous system identified as danger before his mind caught up. The room beyond was enormous, high-ceilinged, dark, the kind of dark that has weight and presence. And in the center of it, on 3 enormous paws, lying down and currently snoring with a volume that vibrated the floor, was the most improbable thing Harry had ever seen. 3 heads. Each one the size of a small car. Each one currently slack-jawed in sleep, fangs catching the faint light from the open door, a sound coming from all 3 throats simultaneously that was less a snore and more a geological event. Fluffy, Ron whispered, in a tone of profound disbelief. Hagrid named it Fluffy, Harry whispered back. Hagrid named a 3-headed dog the size of a house Fluffy. Focus, Hermione whispered. The trapdoor was visible beneath the dog's left front paw, or rather, not beneath it but near it, slightly off to the side, a square of darker wood set into the stone floor. They could reach it. The dog was asleep. All they needed was to be quiet and deliberate and not make sudden movements. Harry looked at Fawkes, who had appeared from somewhere and was perched on a ceiling beam above them, watching with the serene unconcern of something that knew what was going to happen because it had already evaluated all the outcomes. He looked at the trapdoor. He looked at his friends. "We're just looking tonight," he said, quietly. "Down through the trapdoor, see the first chamber, back up. Nothing more." Hermione nodded. Neville nodded. Ron was still staring at the 3 heads with an expression of someone updating their internal catalogue of things that exist. "Ron," Harry said. "I'm fine," Ron said. "I'm completely fine. Let's open the trapdoor." Moving through a room containing a sleeping 3-headed dog was an education in controlled breathing. Harry went first, directly, without hesitation, because hesitation was worse. Hesitation was the mental state in which you were most likely to make the reflexive sound or stumble on the foot placement, and he'd spent enough years moving quietly through spaces where noise had consequences to know that confidence of motion was its own kind of protection. The trapdoor had a ring handle. Harry took it, felt the wood, solid, old, hinged cleanly, and opened it. The darkness below was total. Hermione had a soft lumos going, hooded under her palm, and it caught the edges of a drop that was significant but not fatal, and a tangle of something green and living far below that caught the light and moved slightly, the way plants move when there is no wind. "Devil's snare," Hermione breathed. "It's real. It moves toward heat and light," Harry said. "Fawkes will handle it." They went down. Harry first, a short controlled drop, landing on the soft mass of vegetation that immediately began to curl and reach with the slow intelligence of something that had been waiting a long time for company. Harry let it start to wind around his arm, felt the pressure, and then Fawkes dropped from above in a small controlled burst of light, not full phoenix flame, nothing dramatic, just a warm glow from spread wings, and the devil's snare recoiled the way all things recoil from sudden warmth, fast and total. The rest of them dropped behind him. Ron hit the ground with slightly more noise than ideal and compensated by immediately being very still, and the devil's snare, already retreated, did not redvance. They were in the first chamber. It was wider than Harry had expected. The stone ceiling was low, the air close, and ahead, through a door that had been left slightly open, which told Harry that someone had been here recently enough not to care about the evidence, was a sound of wings and metal. Flying keys, Hermione said, from the map they'd built. Enchanted. You have to catch the right one. We're just looking tonight, Harry repeated. Through the gap in the door the flutter of hundreds of wings was faintly audible, and the glint of metal in the dark, and Harry stood in the threshold and looked at it and catalogued it the same way he was going to catalogue each chamber in turn. Shape of the room. Number of brooms. Quality of light. The character of the movement, panicked or patterned, random or structured. The keys moved in patterns. Tight, clockwise ellipses at varying heights, all of them following a logic that was, once you watched it for 30 seconds, entirely readable. The right key would be the one that moved differently, the one that had been caught before, that bore the marks of handling. 10 minutes, Harry said, and that was enough for this chamber. They went back through the devil's snare, it didn't advance again, held back by the warmth Fawkes maintained without effort, and climbed out through the trapdoor, and Fluffy snored, and they were back in the corridor at 12:15 with their hearts beating at different speeds. Third chamber is the chess set, Ron said, as they moved back toward the stairs, still under the cloak. I know. I want to see it. Not tonight. Ron accepted this. The chess set would be waiting. Walking back, Harry went over what they'd seen. The door left open. That was the detail that mattered. The devil's snare had been disturbed recently, not tonight, not the past few days, but within the past week it had been activated and retracted, which meant someone had gone at least to the key chamber and possibly further. Quirrell, casing the route. Learning the obstacles ahead of the moment he intended to move. He thought about the mirror. About the protection built into the final chamber, the one that Neville had identified. The thing that made the stone inaccessible to someone who wanted to use it. Voldemort, using Quirrell as a vehicle, couldn't get the stone for himself because Quirrell's desire was conditional. He wanted the stone for his master, not himself, but the magic behind the mirror was old and fine enough to perceive the intention behind the intention, the true will operating the body. He'd been turning this over for days. There was something there, something about the mechanism that mattered for how the confrontation would go, and he hadn't fully worked it out yet. Back in the common room, under the fire's last embers, he sat and thought while the others went to bed. Fawkes settled beside him on the chair arm, and the Phoenix's presence was, as always, clarifying, the way a clear night clarifies distances, makes the specific light of specific things visible by removing the ambient noise of everything else. Quirrell wanted the stone for Voldemort. Voldemort wanted the stone for immortality. But Voldemort was already not dead, not fully alive, but persisting. Which meant the stone wasn't about preventing his death. It was about restoring his body. His power. Harry thought about the contract, the fate binding, the sacrificial channeling theory. About Angelina's grandmother's tradition, the channel has to give consent, or the power rebounds and corrupts the binder. He thought about Dumbledore's theory, that the love-fueled sacrifice creates magic that destroys pieces of Voldemort. He thought about his mother. The answer assembled itself slowly, the way answers do when they've been sitting in pieces for a while and finally find the arrangement that makes sense. Voldemort had, on the night he'd killed Harry's family, been destroyed by love magic, by Lily's sacrifice, freely given. And the theory said that the magic had to be freely given to work. So the reason it had worked was because the choice was real. Because Lily hadn't been prepared for it or shaped toward it. She'd made the choice herself, in that hallway, for her own reasons, and the authenticity was the mechanism. Which meant Dumbledore's version, the shaped sacrifice, the conditioned willingness, wasn't just ethically wrong. It potentially wouldn't work. You couldn't manufacture the magic that had saved Harry once. It had to come from somewhere real. It had to be a genuine choice. Which was, Harry thought, both the most obvious thing in the world and apparently the piece of the picture that 57 years of planning had somehow failed to account for. Or had accounted for and decided to risk. He went to bed at 1, and slept without dreams, and woke Wednesday morning with a clarity that felt like weather, like the air after rain, specific and useful. Friday came and went. Saturday. Sunday. On Monday, Snape found Harry in the corridor after breakfast. Not intercepted, found, specifically, waiting beside the portrait of a bowl of fruit near the kitchens, which was not on any route Harry usually took, which meant Snape had consulted the same kind of resources the twins had provided, or had his own equivalent. Tonight, Snape said, without preamble, in a voice pitched for Harry's ears only. Quirrell went to the third-floor corridor last night. He got as far as the second chamber before retreating. He will go again tonight. I don't know the precise time, but his manner this morning suggests urgency. Harry looked at him. What kind of urgency? The kind that comes from something impatient behind your eyes, Snape said, with a precision that indicated he'd been watching Quirrell more closely than anyone else in the building. Whatever drives him is reaching the limit of its patience. Thank you, Harry said. I have not told Dumbledore, Snape said. Yet. The word yet was doing a lot of work. I will tell him if the situation requires it. But I thought you should have the advantage of knowing first. Professor, Harry said, when this is over, regardless of how it goes, I want you to tell me the full story. Your story. Not tonight, not this week. But after. Snape looked at him. The angular, complicated expression that was his unguarded mode. Why? Because you know things about my parents that no one else does, Harry said. And because you deserve to tell it to someone who will actually listen. The silence that followed was one of the more complex silences Harry had sat in since the feast, and he'd sat in several. Go, Snape said, finally. And be careful. Harry went to find his friends. He found them where they usually were, Hermione and Neville in the library, Ron at the Gryffindor table doing something to a charms essay that was less writing and more being in the presence of blank parchment. He collected them with minimum words and they read his face and they came. In the corridor near the abandoned classroom they used for practice, Harry told them what Snape had said. Hermione's response was to close her eyes, run through something internal, and open them with her decisions made. We go tonight. As soon as it's dark enough and the castle settles. Before Quirrell does, Harry said. We need to move fast through the first 2 chambers, she said. We've been through 1. The second, flying keys. I watched the pattern. I know which one. He'd been watching it mentally for a week, running through the pattern every night before sleep, finding the right key by the marks on its wings and the way it moved differently from the others. I can get it inside 2 minutes. Chess, Ron said. He was not casual about it now. He was very still and very direct, the Ron who existed when the situation was serious enough to put the performance away. I play the chess. I know I do. Yes, Harry said. I need you to trust me on it, Ron said. When we get to that chamber. Even if it looks bad. I trust you, Harry said. Ron nodded. One nod, that was all. Devil's snare, Neville said. He'd been quiet, and when he spoke his voice had the quality it had when he was accessing the thing underneath the old uncertainty, steady, sure. The plant. I know it. I've read about it since we went down. I think I can calm it. Not with fire. Actually calm it. There's a magical frequency that venomous tentacula responds to and devil's snare is in the same family, and if he stopped. I've been practicing. Herbology frequency work. It's a very specialized branch. Sprout mentioned it once in third-year curriculum, but it's in the textbook. Hermione was looking at him with an expression that was trying not to be impressed and wasn't succeeding. You taught yourself herbology frequency work in a week. I had evenings free, Neville said. We're taking Neville everywhere, Ron said. Every adventure. He's coming every time. Neville looked at the middle distance with an expression of someone trying not to smile and losing. They went at 9:30 that night. Later than last time, darker, the castle properly settled into its night rhythms. The map showed them a clean path, Filch 2 floors down, Mrs. Norris in the astronomy corridor, Snape in his office and not, apparently, moving yet. Nothing on the third floor. The door opened without resistance. Fluffy lay still and enormous, and Harry nodded to Fawkes, who was already on the ceiling beam, and the phoenix sang. One note. Clean and bright as struck crystal. Not the vision song, not the breaking song. The specific note of a musician who knows exactly the effect they are after. It went through the room and through the animal on the floor and through the stones of the walls, and Fluffy's breathing, already slow, deepened further, and the 3 enormous heads became 3 times heavier, and the paws relaxed, and the trapdoor was clear. Down in 20 seconds. The devil's snare was already moving, it had the memory of the previous disturbance, was primed, began to reach the moment they landed. Neville crouched and put his hands into the edge of the mass and did something Harry didn't have words for, something that was less a spell and more a conversation, a frequency emitted from his palms that Harry couldn't hear but apparently the plant could, and the devil's snare stilled. Not retracted, stilled, the difference between a repelled thing and a calmed one. It lay flat and passive around their feet. Neville stood. His face was very calm. Second chamber, Harry said. The door was open again. The same door from last time, left ajar by someone who had come and not closed it behind them, and as Harry pushed through he understood what that meant. Quirrell had been here tonight. Recently. The air in the key chamber was moved, disturbed, the kind of atmospheric disturbance that follows a person through a space and lingers. He was ahead of them. He's already in, Harry said. How far? Hermione said. Don't know. Move. The keys were chaos, Quirrell had disturbed them coming through, and the chamber was filled with frantic wings beating against the ceiling, against each other, the controlled pattern broken into something more like panic. Harry looked up and through it, looking for the one that moved differently. There, near the ceiling, in the corner, trying to stay away from the disturbance, a larger key with a slightly bent wing, the distinctive wear of something that had been caught before. Harry was on the broom before Hermione had finished selecting one from the rack. He went up fast and clean and the key fled from him in the predictable direction of things that have been caught before. They always went the same way, always tried the same escape, and he had it in his hand in 40 seconds. The lock opened. They went through. The chess chamber was vast and cold and the pieces stood in their places with the silence of things designed to wait, 32 chess figures at human scale, white marble on one side, black obsidian on the other, still as statues and nothing like statues. In the far wall, another door. Between it and them, a board the size of a playing field. And across the board, another figure had already begun to play. Quirrell stood at the far end of the board, his back to them, his wand out, directing the white pieces against a half-played game on the black side. He had been playing alone, both sides, manipulating the board from where he stood, which was not how the chess set was meant to be played and which was going wrong in the specific way that solo play always went wrong in a game designed for 2 minds. The white pieces were losing. He hadn't heard them come in. Or if he had, the thing driving him didn't care. As Harry watched, Quirrell's wand moved and a white knight made a disastrous move, exposing the king, and one of the black rooks took it with a sound like a gunshot. Quirrell made a sound, not quite a stutter, something more guttural, a sound that came from further back than a stutter does. His hand pressed against the side of his turban, the right side, as though something there was pressing back. Then he turned. He saw Harry. His face went through several expressions in quick succession, the stutter shock, genuine surprise, then something else, something that floated over the surface of his expression like oil over water, cold and patient. "Potter," said a voice that was not Quirrell's. It came from the right side. From under the turban. It came from between the cotton folds like something that had been pressing against a door for 10 years and had finally found a gap. The temperature in the chest chamber dropped. "You're early," the voice said. It was thin and high and had a quality that the word cold barely touched. It was cold the way deep space is cold, the cold of the complete absence of warmth rather than the temporary absence of it. Harry said nothing. Fawkes, who had come in behind them without Harry noticing, circled the ceiling of the chest chamber once, wings spread, and made the warning sound, the one like an alarm through water, the one that had first happened at the feast. "We need to play," Ron said quietly, from directly behind Harry's right shoulder. He was looking at the board with complete focus, the specific narrowed quality of his chess attention, as though Quirrell and the voice and the temperature drop were all fully registered and fully set aside for the duration of what needed to happen. "Harry. We need to play the game." "Play it," Harry said, without looking away from Quirrell. "I need black," Ron said. "Quirrell's been playing both sides. White's in a losing position and that door's at the other end of the board. I need to take black and finish this fast." "Do it," Harry said. Ron stepped forward and addressed the board. Not tentatively, directly, with the ease of someone entering a space they belong to. He looked at the black pieces and the black pieces looked at him, and Harry watched something pass between them, the negotiation between chess player and chess set, and the pieces responded the way Neville's plants responded to the right frequency, they settled. "Knight to e5, Ron said. His voice was perfectly steady. "Queen to g4. Bishop to c3. The board came alive. Harry kept his eyes on Quirrell. "You shouldn't have come," the voice said. It was, Harry thought, genuinely curious. This was not planned for tonight. Not for this. The curiosity was awful, somehow, it was the curiosity of something that was evaluating, adjusting, finding angles. "But you are here. Interesting." "I know what you're looking for," Harry said. "Yes," the voice said. "The Phoenix told you quite a lot." "Fawkes told me what mattered," Harry said. "The rest I worked out." A sound from behind the turban that was not speech, something pressed against the fabric. "You have your mother's eyes," the voice said. "I always found that irritating." "She died stopping you," Harry said. "That must have been irritating too." "It was an inconvenience," the voice said. "All things are correctable given time." This, a sense of pressure, of will behind the words, has been 10 years of correction. Tonight the correction completes. "No," Harry said. "It doesn't." Quirrell raised his wand. Harry didn't raise his. He looked at the wand pointed at him and felt the magic in him, ungoverned now, direct, the full capacity of whatever he was without the ceiling that had contained it for 11 years, and understood, with a clarity that felt like the weather after rain, that the gap between what he could do and what Quirrell could manage was not small. Quirrell was a competent wizard. The thing driving him had been, once, the most powerful dark wizard in the world, and was now a remnant living in the back of a man's head, degraded by a decade of disembodiment, operating through a conduit that was already breaking down under the strain. Harry was 11 years old and had been carrying magic that Dumbledore had spent 30 years suppressing because he was afraid of what it would do unsuppressed. "Expelliarmus," Harry said. Not loudly. Not with the dramatic pause of theatrical magic. Just the word, clearly stated, with the full direct intention behind it and the full depth of his actual capacity behind that. The spell that left his wand was about 4 times larger than it had any right to be. Quirrell's wand flew. Quirrell flew, briefly, backward 6 feet, colliding with the wall of the chest chamber with a sound that dislodged dust from the ceiling. He slumped against the stone, and the turban unwound slightly from the impact, and what was revealed on the back of his head was, Harry looked at it for exactly as long as he needed to and then looked away, because there are things you can look at for only so long before the image settles too deeply to be comfortable. A face. Pale, barely there, sunk into the back of Quirrell's skull like a watermark in old paper, red-eyed and thin-mouthed and ancient, with a specific kind of ancient that has nothing to do with age and everything to do with choices. It looked at Harry. "Interesting," it said. "And then, I see your mother in you." "She stopped you once," Harry said. "I'm doing it again." He crossed the chamber floor. Behind him, Ron's chess game was reaching its conclusion in a series of moves that were clearly surgical and efficient, the sound of chess pieces moving, decisive, final. Harry heard a check, and then, 40 seconds later, checkmate, and the crash of a white piece falling over, and then a door at the far end of the board swung open. But Harry wasn't going through that door. He was here for this. He crouched in front of Quirrell, who was dazed and slumped and only partially present. The thing on the back of his head was more coherent than the man whose body it occupied, more alert, watching Harry with those red eyes with the calculation that never stopped. Fawkes landed on Harry's shoulder. "What are you going to do?" the voice said. "You cannot kill him. You are 11 years old. You have no experience of." "I'm not going to kill him," Harry said. "I'm going to separate you." A pause. "That is not possible." "I don't know if it's possible," Harry said honestly. "I know what Fawkes can do. I know what Phoenix Fire can do to something that doesn't belong in a living body. And I know that you're not here because you won in some fight with Quirrell, you're here because he opened a door and let you in, and doors can close. You will destroy him trying," the voice said, and there was something in it now that was not the confident cold of a moment ago, but something thinner, something that was recalculating fast and not liking the numbers. "Maybe," Harry said. "But Quirrell made his choices, and those choices brought him here, and the question isn't what happens to him. The question is what happens to you." The red eyes watched him. Harry reached up and took Fawkes from his shoulder and held the phoenix in both hands, the way you might hold something you were offering. Not as a weapon. As a thing with its own will and its own understanding. Fawkes sang. Not the breaking song or the warning song. The other one, the one Harry had never heard directly but recognized from the stories, the kind of song that belonged to Phoenix Fire in its oldest use, the healing property that went beyond wounds and into the deeper categories of damage, the kind that required the injury to have a source that could be identified and addressed. The song filled the chess chamber the way fire fills a fireplace, suddenly, completely, from every direction at once. Harry heard Hermione make a sound from somewhere behind him. Neville said something, very quietly, that might have been prayer or might have been the name of a plant. The face on the back of Quirrell's head opened its mouth. What came out was not a scream. It was something older than a scream, something that belonged to the category of sounds that living things make when something that shouldn't be happening is happening, and it echoed off the chess chamber walls and went into the stone and stayed there, the way cold air stays in stone long after the temperature changes. The face dimmed. It did not vanish, not immediately, not cleanly. This was not a neat cinematic dissolution. It receded, the way something recedes when the light that sustained it changes, and Quirrell's body lurched forward and caught himself on his hands, and the stutter came back, genuine this time, uncontrolled, the real thing rather than the cover for something else, and he looked up at Harry with eyes that were his own. Quirrell said. He stopped. He looked at his hands. You need a healer, Harry said. How did you? Quirrell was shaking, fine tremors through his whole body. He said when the bond broke it would. He was wrong about what would happen to the bond, Harry said. He's been wrong about a few things tonight. Fawkes made a sound above them, not the directed song anymore, but the everyday warmth of presence, and it was, Harry thought, the most appropriate response to the situation. Things were not finished, Voldemort was not gone, was not destroyed, had retreated and been diminished and would find another way, because that was what Voldemort did, because that was the nature of the thing. But the particular shape of tonight was done. Harry. Ron's voice, from the door at the far end of the board. I've got it open. Harry looked at the door. Through it was the logic potion chamber, and beyond that, the mirror and the stone. He could go through. He could retrieve the stone, remove it from the equation entirely, make that entire chain of planned events impossible. He stood up. "Can you walk?" he said to Quirrell. Quirrell looked at him. His turban had unwound entirely and was pooling in his lap, and without it he looked smaller, younger, a man rather than a host. Can you walk?" Harry repeated. "Yes," Quirrell said, slowly. "I think so." "Then you're going to walk back through those chambers with Hermione and Neville, and you're going to tell Madame Pomfrey you need medical attention, and you are going to tell Professor Dumbledore what happened tonight." Quirrell stared at him. "You're letting me go?" "You're sick," Harry said. "You were used. That doesn't mean you bear no responsibility for your choices, but it means tonight you go to the hospital wing, not somewhere worse." He held the man's eyes. "Don't make me regret it." Quirrell nodded, slowly, the nod of someone who had expected punishment and received something more complicated and was not sure what to do with it. Harry looked at Ron. "We're going through." Hermione started to say something. "We need to get the stone," Harry said. "Tonight. Before Dumbledore arrives and decides to manage the situation. If the stone is in his hands, it goes back into a cabinet somewhere and becomes leverage in his plan." He looked at her steadily. "We take it. We decide what happens to it. Not him." Hermione closed her mouth. "Opened it. That's technically theft." "Yes," Harry said. A pause. "Right," she said. "Let's go." They went through the logic potion chamber. Hermione solved it in under a minute, because of course she did. She had the kind of mind that logic puzzles were made for and the kind of patience that made the making not feel like pressure. Harry and Ron drank the forward potion. Hermione and Neville drank the return potion and went back to escort Quirrell. Through the final door, the mirror chamber was large and dark, and the mirror stood in the center of it, massive, ornate, the frame carved with words that ran in a circle, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi. Harry walked up to it. He stood in front of it and looked at what it showed him, and stood there for a moment with the full weight of it, the image in the glass, and he looked at it honestly and directly, and then he looked away. "What did you see?" Ron said. "What I want," Harry said. "What I actually want. Not the stone." He reached toward the mirror, toward the glass, his hand pressed flat against it, and felt the mirror's magic engage with him, read him, assessed the nature of his desire. The stone dropped into his palm. It was small. Warm. Red as old blood, smooth as river-worn rock, and he held it in his hand and looked at it and thought about everything it could do and everything it had been used as, and he curled his fingers around it. "Good," he said. They went back through the potions chamber, through the logic puzzle, back to the chessboard, and the board had cleared, the pieces standing still in their end positions, the evidence of Ron's game preserved in the stone. Harry glanced at it as he walked through and found the sequence elegant and decisive and entirely Ron. Back through the key chamber. Back through the devil's snare, which Neville had already handled and which remained flat and docile. Back up through the trapdoor. Fluffy still slept. They came out of the third-floor corridor into the cool castle air and stood in the passage and breathed, and Harry had the stone in his pocket and the chess chamber was behind him and Quirrell was somewhere ahead of them heading toward the hospital wing. Ron sat down against the wall with the bonelessness of someone whose legs had decided independently that they'd done enough. "That was," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "The chess," Ron said. "Did you see the board? The configuration?" "It was extraordinary," Hermione said, directly, in the tone she used when she had decided a compliment was accurate and there was no reason not to give it. Ron looked at her. He was not quite sure how to handle Hermione being direct about something good. "Oh," he said. "Brilliant," Neville said. "I watched 3 moves and I knew." Ron looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Right," he said. "Good. Fine. I'm fine." He stood. What do we do with the stone? Harry thought about Flammel. About the old alchemist and his wife, who had lived with the stone for 600 years and had, according to everything Hermione had found, prepared themselves for its eventual destruction. Who had, by most accounts, made their peace with mortality a long time ago and kept the stone out of principle rather than desperation. We return it, Harry said. Hermione blinked. To Flammel. To Flammel. Not to Dumbledore. Not to the Ministry. To the man it belongs to, with the full story of what happened tonight, and the recommendation that he destroys it. He looked at them. We write the letter tomorrow. We send it with Fawkes. Can a phoenix just go to France? Ron said. Fawkes, who was on Harry's shoulder, gave him the look. Apparently yes, Ron said. They went back to the common room through the quiet castle, all four of them under the invisibility cloak, pressed together, and the parchment map showed them a clear path and the portraits dozed and the castle breathed around them, and at one point Ron put his hand on Harry's arm in the dark of the cloak and said, very quietly, "You were right, by the way. About choosing." Harry turned his head. He wasn't going to stop, Ron said. Voldemort. Regardless of what happened with the stone, he was coming back eventually. But on Dumbledore's timetable, it would have happened to you, not been done by you. A pause. You got to do it. Harry thought about this. About the difference between being the thing that happens and the person who makes things happen. Yeah, he said. Yeah, Ron said. They reached the portrait hole. The fat lady woke irritably and then saw Fawkes and became considerably more cooperative about the password. The common room was warm and empty and Harry sat by the last of the fire with the stone in his hand, small and red and warm, and Fawkes was on the chair back, and his friends were with him, and somewhere in the castle Dumbledore was going to get a message very soon from a shaking defense professor in the hospital wing, and the conversation that followed was going to be remarkable in several ways. Harry looked at the stone. Thought about everything it had been the center of, the plan, the obstacles, the designed path, 57 years of preparation for a death that was not going to happen the way it was supposed to. He put the stone in his pocket. Hermione had her notebook. She was already writing the letter to Flammel. Ron fell asleep in his chair within 5 minutes, which was, Harry thought, a genuine talent. Neville sat quietly and said, I think I want to learn more about the frequency work. More than herbology covers. Yes, Harry said. You should. Outside, the Scottish night was still and cold and the castle's turrets were dark against the stars and somewhere in the ground something large moved in the dark, and in a hospital wing on the second floor a man who had been carrying something terrible for a year was sleeping under Madame Pomfrey's care, lighter than he'd been since Albania, and above all of it the night moved, indifferent and enormous, and tomorrow was coming. Harry sat by the dying fire with the philosopher's stone in his pocket and felt, for the first time in his memory, that the future was genuinely open. Not planned toward. Not designed for. Just open, the way spaces are open before someone builds in them, full of every possible thing. He was 11 years old. He was just getting started. Chapter 6, The World After the Fire. Dumbledore came to the hospital wing at 2 in the morning. Harry knew this because Snape told him the next day, in the corridor outside the potions classroom, with the flat precise delivery of someone reporting facts and deliberately not editorializing. Pomfrey had sent for Dumbledore when Quirrell arrived. Dumbledore had spent 40 minutes with Quirrell, had come out of the ward with an expression that Snape described, after a brief pause, as recalibrated, and had gone directly to the third-floor corridor. Where he had found the door open, the dog asleep, and the trapdoor undisturbed. He went down, Snape said. Through all 6 chambers. He arrived at the mirror chamber at approximately 3 in the morning. Another pause. The stone was gone. Harry said nothing. He stood in the mirror chamber for some time, Snape said. I don't know what the mirror showed him. I can speculate, but I won't. He looked at Harry steadily. When he came back up he went to his office. He has been there since. He has not sent for you. He's thinking, Harry said. He is doing what Albus Dumbledore does when he has lost control of a sequence he spent decades constructing, Snape said. Which is to say he is thinking very hard and very fast and producing a new plan. Let him, Harry said. Snape raised an eyebrow. It was a small movement, but on Snape's face it carried the weight of a full sentence. I sent the stone to Flamel this morning, Harry said. With Fawkes. It's gone. The eyebrow didn't lower. If anything, it went fractionally higher. Flamel will destroy it, Harry said. He and his wife have been ready for a long time. The letter explained everything. He looked at Snape. There's no stone for Dumbledore to recover and manage. The piece of his plan that required Voldemort to come here for it, to set up the specific sequence of events he needed, it's gone. Snape was quiet for a moment. Voldemort will find another approach, he said. Yes, Harry said. But it won't be this one. And this one was the one Dumbledore had 57 years to prepare for. He looked at the potions professor steadily. I'll handle the next one when it comes. The eyebrow finally settled back to its normal position. Snape looked at him for a long moment with the angular complicated expression, the one that was the closest he came to having his face do something fully human. You are, he said, the most exhausting student I have taught in 20 years. You've been teaching for 11 years, Harry said. The other 9 years were largely uneventful, Snape said. You've compressed considerable drama into a fortnight. He paused. My potions classroom, Saturday morning. 7 o'clock. Harry blinked. For what? You have a great deal of suppressed magical development to recover, Snape said, with the specific briskness of someone who has made a decision and is not going to discuss the emotional texture of it. 3 years of normal Hogwarts education at minimum. We are going to address that systematically. He paused. Tell no one. The last thing I need is other students expecting remedial genius lessons. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me, Snape said, which was what he said instead of you're welcome. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. He swept off down the corridor with the self-generated momentum that was his default mode of travel, and Harry watched him go and thought about what the hat had said. More complicated than his reputation. That was one way to put it. The week that followed was not what Harry had expected, though he was becoming better at not having specific expectations. He'd thought there would be a confrontation, a summoning to Dumbledore's office, a reckoning, something formal and weighted. What he got instead was silence, and silence from Dumbledore was, he was learning, more complex than noise from most people. The old man was at meals. He was in the castle. He taught nothing, because Dumbledore didn't teach, but he moved through the building with his usual magnificent presence, spoke to students in corridors, addressed staff at the table with his characteristic warmth. On Thursday he stopped Harry after breakfast. Just a hand on the shoulder, gentle, as the students filed out of the great hall. I received a letter from Nicholas yesterday, Dumbledore said. His voice was even and warm and did not contain the specific quality it had during their planned meetings. The performance was down, or further down than usual, enough that what Harry could hear underneath was something quieter. He spoke highly of you. He was kind, Harry said. He said the letter was clear and honest and that the recommendation was sound. Dumbledore paused. He also said that his wife Perenelle sent her regards to the boy with the phoenix, which is apparently the way she chose to describe you. The corner of his mouth did something small. They are at peace with the decision. They have been at peace with it for some time, as you suspected. Harry nodded. The stone is gone, Dumbledore said. Stating a fact. No accusation in it. Yes, Harry said. Voldemort persists, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. I know. Dumbledore looked at him with those blue eyes that saw everything and were currently seeing, Harry thought, a version of a boy that was not the version they'd been looking at for 57 years. What will you do? The old man asked. And it was, this time, a genuine question. Not rhetorical. Not strategic. Genuine. Come back next year, Harry said. And the year after. Learn what I need to learn. Build what I need to build. He held Dumbledore's gaze. And when Voldemort moves again, and he will, I'll handle it. He paused. My way. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The great hall had emptied around them, and they stood in it with the detritus of breakfast still on the tables and the enchanted ceiling showing a grey Scottish morning. I have something to tell you, Dumbledore said. Harry waited. Your father's family, Dumbledore said, slowly. The Potters. The invisibility cloak that you found in your trunk, it was your father's. It is an heirloom, and a remarkable one. It is one of 3 objects of considerable magical significance. He paused. I have been in possession of it since James's death. I should have given it to you years ago. I did not, because it fit within the design sequence. He looked at Harry. It is yours. Unconditionally. I know, Harry said. I've been using it. Something moved through Dumbledore's expression. Not quite amusement, not quite its opposite. Yes, he said. I rather thought you might have been. What are the other 2 objects? Harry said. A long pause. The grey morning shifted to slightly greyer through the ceiling. That, Dumbledore said, is a conversation for another time. When I am more certain of my own intentions around it. He said this with a self-awareness that was clearly not comfortable for him, the awareness of a man checking his own motivations and finding them still complicated. I have learned, recently, that my certainty is not always an asset. You quoted yourself, Harry said. From what you said to me. Yes, Dumbledore said. I did. He looked at Fawkes on Harry's shoulder. Take care of him, he said, and it was unclear which of them he was speaking to, and Harry thought that might be intentional. He walked out of the great hall into the stone corridor and the day, and behind him Dumbledore stood in the empty hall with the detritus of 500 breakfasts around him, and whatever he was doing in the silence of that, Harry left him to it. McGonagall found him at lunch. She was waiting outside the library, which suggested she'd known his route, and fell into step beside him without preamble or greeting in the McGonagall way that he'd come to find both efficient and oddly companionable. Quirrell has been transferred to St. Mungo's, she said. Madame Pomfrey determined that the extent of his condition was beyond the school's facilities. Will he recover? Harry said. Physically, yes. The prognosis is good. She paused. The psychological assessment is more complicated. There are specialists. Good, Harry said. She was quiet for the length of a corridor. Then, I spoke with Albus this morning. A proper conversation. The first one we've had in a very long time, by which I mean the first one in which neither of us was performing a role. Another pause, this one longer, and Harry could hear in it the specific weight of a woman processing the aftermath of something she'd been managing not to fully confront for years. He told me most of it. I suspect not quite all. But most. Harry said nothing. I want to be clear about something, she said, and her voice had the quality it had when she was stating something she'd decided on and was not going to revisit. What was done to you was wrong. Not complicated wrong. Not understandable in context wrong. Simply wrong. I should have intervened years ago, on the basis of what I suspected. I did not. I am telling you this not because I expect absolution but because I think you deserve honesty from every adult in your life who failed you, and I am capable of providing that even when it is uncomfortable. Harry looked at her as they walked. Her profile was exactly as composed as ever, chin level, robes precise, the kind of composure that didn't come from not feeling things but from decades of deciding that feelings were most useful when they informed action rather than replaced it. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said, in the same tone Snape used for the same phrase, and with the same meaning underneath it. You both say that, Harry said. She glanced at him briefly. Severus and I agree on very little, she said, but we are both, apparently, constitutionally incapable of accepting gratitude. She paused. It is possible the school environment selects for this. Harry laughed. It was the genuine kind. McGonagall's mouth did the thing it did when she was not smiling and was nonetheless somehow smiling. They reached the library junction, where their paths diverged. She stopped and faced him. I intend, she said, to be more active in my awareness of your situation from this point forward. Not in a way that removes your agency. I have seen what removing your agency produces and I have no interest in replicating it. But present. She looked at him steadily. You have good instincts and considerable ability and a set of friends who are, in my assessment, remarkable. But you are 11 years old and you are going to make mistakes, and when you do I would like you to feel that you can bring them to me. Yes, Harry said. I'd like that. She nodded once. Then, 10 points to Gryffindor. He blinked. For what? I'll think of something, she said, and walked away with the specific stride that covered ground without appearing hurried. The last week of term had a different texture from the first. Not calmer, busier, actually, the compressed chaos of exams and packing and the social negotiations of a year of people who had learned each other's rhythms over 9 months. But different in the way that things are different when the structure underlying them has shifted. Harry sat his first-year exams with the direct, unhurried confidence of someone who had been reading ahead since September. Charms was easy. Transfiguration was easy. Potions was interesting, which was not a word most first years applied to it, but Harry had the advantage of Snape's Saturday mornings, which had been quietly extraordinary, for sessions of practice that covered, in Snape's compressed and exacting style, material that most Hogwarts students encountered in their 3rd and 4th years. Not remediation. Acceleration. On the Saturday after the 3rd-floor corridor, Snape had asked, at the end of the session, why Harry had let Quirrell walk rather than holding him for Dumbledore's assessment. Harry had thought about it. Because he was used, he said. And because the thing using him was already gone. And because I didn't want to do something permanent in the adrenaline of the situation. He paused. Was that wrong? Snape had been quiet for a long moment. No, he said, and it was one of the quieter words Harry had ever heard from him. It was not wrong. They hadn't discussed it again, but the following Saturday, Snape had arrived at the potions classroom 7 minutes early and had been, marginally, less severe than usual, in the way that people are sometimes marginally less severe after you've done something they respect. Hermione came top of the year in every written exam, which surprised no one and was greeted by most of their year with the specific resignation of people who had known it was coming since roughly September. She received the news of her results with her characteristic combination of satisfaction and immediate forward planning. She was already, Harry knew, reading ahead for 2nd year. Ron's exam performance was, by his own cheerful assessment, adequate. His mother sent him a letter expressing this same assessment in slightly different terms. His father sent a separate letter that was shorter and warmer and included, almost as a postscript, a note addressed to Harry that said, I've heard some of what you've been up to this year. Well done. Come stay with us this summer if you'd like. Arthur Weasley. Harry read this 3 times. He wrote back that same evening. The letter took 4 drafts, because the simple words kept not being enough. Neville's exam results were, by his own wide-eyed assessment, not what he had expected. By which he meant they were good. Not extraordinary, not Hermione, but solid, consistent, and in herbology he'd scored higher than anyone in the year, including 2 students who had been expected to come top by their own self-assessment. Professor Sprout stopped him in the greenhouse on the last practical exam day and said, with the warmth of someone who noticed things and was pleased when they were good, I've been watching you this year, Mr. Longbottom. You've had something click. She said it like a compliment, and it was, and Neville received it like someone who was still learning to hold those without immediately setting them down. I had some help, Neville said. The best students always do, she said. The mark of intelligence is knowing whose help to take. He told Harry this at dinner and Harry said nothing, because nothing was needed, because the satisfaction on Neville's face was its own complete thing that did not require supplementing. The train home was arranged for the last day of June. On the second-to-last evening, Harry went up to the Ollery alone. Not entirely alone, Fawkes came, as Fawkes always came, riding the shoulder and carrying the warmth that had become so constant and familiar that Harry occasionally forgot, for stretches of ordinary time, that the presence on his shoulder was extraordinary. He stood at the Ollery window and looked out at Scotland going gold in the late afternoon, the lake flat and dark, the forest deep and still, the mountains in the distance wearing low cloud like old men wearing hats. He took the invisibility cloak from his pocket and held it. The fabric moved like water through his hands, cold and impossible, and he thought about his father wearing it, laughing, and his mother with her green eyes, and the diagram drawn in light over an infant who didn't know yet what was being drawn on him. He thought about the plan. 57 years of it. The architecture of control that had been built around his life before he existed, maintained through his childhood, designed to deliver him to a specific moment in a specific condition for a specific purpose. He thought about all the things that plan had cost him. Not abstractly, specifically. The Dursleys. The cupboard. 11 years of being made small by design. The invisible ceiling on his magic, on his thinking, on his understanding of what he was and what he was capable of. He thought about all of this without the old reflexive flinch, which was new and still slightly startling, the way it's startling when a chronic pain goes quiet and the silence feels like something rather than nothing. Then he put the cloak away and looked at Fawkes. "What now?" he said. Not asking for an answer, the question was its own answer, the kind of question that is actually a statement about where you're standing. Here. Now. What next? Fawkes sang. Not the breaking song or the warning or the warmth. Something different, something Harry hadn't heard before, longer than usual, more complex, with the quality of something being described rather than something being done. Images came with it, softer than the night of the feast, more suggestion than vision. He saw a road, which was not literally true but was metaphorically so precise it operated like truth. He saw people on it that he recognized and people he hadn't met yet. He saw a dark shape far ahead that was neither absent nor close, which was honest. Voldemort was out there, diminished and retreating and patient, and that was the truth of it. Neither minimized nor dramatized. He saw himself on the road. Upright. Moving. Choosing. "Yeah," Harry said. "I know." Fawkes stopped singing. The Ollery was quiet and high and the evening light was long and red on the stone, and below the window Scotland was doing what Scotland does in late June, which is to refuse the darkness with a stubbornness that has something of the sublime about it. Harry went down to dinner. The last evening was complicated in the way all last evenings at good places are complicated, the knowledge that it's ending sitting alongside the genuine pleasure of the present, producing a specific kind of awareness where you notice everything slightly more than usual. Harry noticed the great hall. The floating candles, the house tables with their colors and their noise, the staff table with its assembled teachers, Flitwick's enthusiasm, Sprout's warmth, McGonagall's composed watchfulness, Snape's structured severity, and at the center, magnificent and complicated, Dumbledore. The headmaster stood for the end-of-year address. He spoke, as he always did, with warmth and wit and the easy authority of someone who had done this for decades and found it genuinely meaningful. He said the things he always said: another year concluded, well done to the hard-working, commiserations to the disappointed, the holidays ahead and the year to come. He awarded house points in summary and Gryffindor won the House Cup, which Ron considered a personal vindication even though he hadn't been a tiebreaker. But near the end, Dumbledore paused. It was a different kind of pause from the ones he usually made for effect, not rhetorical, not dramatic. Actual. The pause of someone deciding whether to say something and making the decision in real time. This year, he said, has reminded me of something I was in danger of forgetting. He was not looking at Harry. He was looking at the room, at the broad sweep of faces, at 1,000 years of students replaced and replaced and replaced, all of them moving through this hall on their way to lives he would never fully know. That education, real education, is not the filling of a vessel but the lighting of a fire. And that the most important fires, he said, are the ones that light themselves. He sat down. Harry looked at the old man and found him looking back, briefly, across the room. The blue eyes behind the half-moon glasses held something that was not warmth and not calculation and not grief, at least not only. Something more recent. Something that was still finding its form. Harry looked away first again. But this time it wasn't important. It was just the direction he happened to look. At the Gryffindor table, Ron was arguing with Fred and George about something involving a chocolate frog card. Hermione was talking to Neville about second-year course selection, because Hermione, and Neville was listening with the expression of someone who had decided that forward momentum was its own kind of protection. Angelina, 2 seats down, was explaining something to the girl beside her with the animated hands of someone who has found the right language for something they've been trying to say. Harry sat in the middle of it and ate his treacle tart. The train home left at 11. They loaded in the morning, the platform at Hogsmeade busy and loud and smelling of coal smoke and magic and the particular excitement of children about to be liberated for 2 months. Trunks on trolleys, owls in cages, the Weasley twins causing a localized chaos near the front 3 carriages. McGonagall at the barrier with her clipboard and her look. Harry stood on the platform with his trunk and Fawkes on his shoulder and his 3 friends around him and looked at the red train. "Okay," Ron said. "Summer. Mrs. Weasley is expecting all of you," Hermione said, in the tone of someone who has already confirmed this and is stating facts. Arthur Weasley's letter was apparently thorough. "All of us?" Neville said. "She wrote to my parents," Hermione said. "And to your grandmother." Your grandmother said yes in about 1 sentence, which apparently surprised everyone who knows her. Neville blinked. "She said yes. She said you deserved a good summer," Hermione said, and then looked back at her own trunk because she was Hermione and unsolicited kindness embarrassed her to deliver, but she delivered it anyway. Neville was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said, softly, to himself rather than any of them. "Okay." They got on the train. Harry found a compartment and the others filed in, Ron by the window, Neville across from him, Hermione already opening a book but holding it loosely rather than reading it, present, the book a prop for the moment when conversation required more space than constant talking could provide. Fawkes took the luggage rack above Harry's seat, which was technically not permitted, but the train guard who came to check tickets looked at the Phoenix, looked at Harry, and decided that some things were above his pay grade. An hour into the journey, when the castle had disappeared behind hills and the landscape had settled into the rolling green of an English summer, Harry leaned back in his seat and looked at the ceiling of the compartment and thought. He thought about the Wizengamot. About Hermione's annotation in the restricted section text, the legal invalidity of a fate binding performed without parental consent. About Angelina's channeling theory. About the public evidence, the sorting feast, the witnesses, the hat's testimony in a room full of Gryffindors. He had spent 9 months learning what had been done to him. He had spent 9 months watching the people who served the plan either deepen their commitment to it or begin to question it. He had, not strategically, just honestly, gathered allies by being honest with them, and those allies were becoming something. The legal case was Hermione's project and she had been, in her methodical way, building it since October. She had 3 primary sources, 12 secondary sources, and a letter from a retired Wizengamot clerk who had responded to her inquiry about historical fate-binding cases with more detail than she'd asked for and a clear implication that he found the practice as objectionable as she did. The public testimony was the hat's, and the hat had been clear that it was willing to speak at a formal inquiry. A hat with 1,000 years of memory was a remarkable witness. A hat that had been silenced for 31 years by the subject of the inquiry was a more remarkable one. The physical evidence was Fawkes. A phoenix who had publicly dissolved a registered enchantment placed by the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, in front of 500 witnesses, and had then bonded to the enchantment subject rather than returning to its previous keeper. No wizard in history had told a phoenix what to think. A phoenix's choices were, by magical and legal tradition, the most reliable evidence of the moral character of a situation that existed. And then there was Snape. Harry hadn't asked Snape directly. He wouldn't ask directly, that was not how Snape made decisions. Snape made decisions in private, through the long process of a man who had learned not to trust his instincts because his instincts had led him somewhere terrible when he was young, who had been rebuilding his decision-making apparatus ever since. The Saturday mornings were, Harry suspected, part of that process. Something Snape was doing for reasons that had more in it than purely academic interest in his development. When Snape was ready, he would speak. And what he knew, about the plan, about the prophecy, about the years of service he'd given to a sequence that had been built to use the memory of a woman he loved as a management tool, was going to matter enormously. "You're thinking about the inquiry," Hermione said, without looking up from her book. "How did you know?" Harry said. "You get a specific look," she said. "Strategic but not tactical. It's the future planning look." Ron looked at Harry. "Do you have a future planning look?" "Apparently," Harry said. Ron said, returning to his chocolate frog. "I have a chess look, apparently. People tell me." "You absolutely have a chess look," Neville said. "What does it look like?" Ron said. "Like you've already won but you're waiting politely for the other person to realize," Neville said. Ron processed this. "That's actually accurate," he said, without embarrassment. "The inquiry," Hermione said, setting her book down properly, "is going to be complicated by his position. Chief Warlock. He controls the chamber, the agenda, the panel selection. A direct formal complaint through standard channels is going to be managed before it reaches hearing." She had thought about this considerably. The quality of her certainty was the quality of conclusions reached after long work. "We need an approach that bypasses his procedural control." "The Prophet," Harry said. She nodded. "I've been thinking about that. Rita Skeeter is, not Rita Skeeter," Harry said. "She'll sensationalize it and make it about drama rather than truth and it'll be dismissed as tabloid mud-throwing." He'd read enough issues of The Prophet in the common room to understand its topology. There's a journalist on the main staff, not the gossip column. Marlowe Pitch. She did the piece on the Muggleborn registration inquiry 3 years ago. Two-part, sourced, changed policy. Hermione looked at him. "How do you know about Marlowe Pitch?" "Angelina mentioned her," Harry said. "Her mother knows the byline. Said she was the only journalist at The Prophet who actually investigated rather than reported." Hermione was already taking out her notebook. "I'll find a contact address." "We don't move on any of this until second year," Harry said. "This summer we prepare. Build the formal case document. Identify every source. Organize the sequence of disclosure." He looked around the compartment. "Dumbledore has had 9 months since the feast to prepare his own response, and he's good at this, and we have to be better." He paused. "But we have something he can't manufacture." "What?" Neville said. "The truth," Harry said. "The actual truth. Not a version of it, not a framing of it. The full, documented, witnessed truth, delivered in the right order to the right people." He looked at Fawkes. "And we have him." Fawkes tilted his head with the expression that was his version of obviously. "Can I say something?" Neville said. They all looked at him. He had a quality of gathering himself, the same quality he'd had before the Lumos that first evening in the abandoned classroom, the stillness before the commitment. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said, to Harry. "About the prophecy. About how it could have been me. About how Dumbledore chose you because you were more useful for his purposes." He paused. I'm not angry about it. I was, a bit, the first few days. Not at you. At the situation." He looked at his hands, then back up. "But I've decided something." "Yeah?" Harry said. "It doesn't matter that he didn't choose me," Neville said. "What matters is that I choose. That's what this year has been about, hasn't it? You choosing instead of being chosen. That's the actual point. He paused. So I'm choosing. I'm in. Not because the prophecy says I should be, not because someone decided it was necessary. Because I've decided it is. He looked around the compartment. Whatever comes next. I'm in. The train ran on through the green English countryside, and the compartment was quiet for a moment with the specific quality of quiet that follows something true being said simply. Good, Harry said. Obviously, Ron said, as though there had never been a question. Hermione said nothing, but she was writing it down, and somehow that was the most meaningful response of the three. The train reached King's Cross at midday. The platform on the Muggle side was busy and ordinary, families and luggage and the organized chaos of arrivals, and Harry stood on the platform with his trunk and Fawkes and watched the Weasley family reunion happening 20 feet away. Mrs. Weasley, who was a small round woman with a voice like a warm room, distributing hugs to her children with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had been counting the days, and Mr. Weasley, tall and balding and radiating the specific joy of a man who is exactly where he wants to be. Hermione's parents were precise and warm and looked at their daughter with the expression of people who had raised someone extraordinary and were still slightly awed by how it had turned out. Her mother looked at Fawkes with understandable caution and then, when Fawkes looked back with that warm gold assessment, seemed to decide that the bird was fine. Neville's grandmother was a tall woman in a formidable hat, with the posture of someone who had decided decades ago that the world was going to take her seriously and had never revised that decision. She looked at Neville when he came through the barrier and something moved in her face, something that was pride but older than pride, older and more complicated, the kind that had been waiting to be uncomplicated for a long time and wasn't quite sure how. Neville walked up to her and she looked at him and he looked at her and she said, without preamble, "You did well." "Thank you, Gran," he said. She put her hand briefly on his shoulder. For her, Harry suspected, that was considerable. Harry stood with his trunk and Fawkes, and around him the families assembled and regrouped and began the process of departure, and the platform noise moved around him in the specific way that crowds move around a still point. Then he saw Ron's mother looking at him. Not the way people usually looked at him, not the wide-eyed recognition, not the startle of the scar, not the reverence or the curiosity or the complex mixture of mythology and pity that he'd become familiar with over 9 months. Mrs. Weasley was looking at him the way a woman looks at a child who is standing alone on a platform, and the expression was simple and uncomplicated and entirely present tense. She walked over to him. "Harry," she said. "I'm Molly. Are you ready to come along, then?" He looked at her. Behind her, Ron was managing a cage with a large asthmatic owl named Errol and making faces at his twin brothers simultaneously, and Mr. Weasley was asking Hermione's father an excited question about something the Muggle man was apparently carrying that Mr. Weasley considered fascinating, and Neville and his grandmother were moving toward the barrier side by side at a matching pace that was itself a kind of conversation. "Yes," Harry said. "I'm ready." She put a hand briefly between his shoulder blades, not an effusive gesture, just contact, just "I see you, you are here, welcome," and turned toward the barrier. Harry picked up his trunk. Fawkes shifted on his shoulder, settling, warm and steady and permanent in the way of things that have made an absolute choice and are at peace with it. They went through the barrier together, the whole ragged improbable group of them, into the ordinary Monday afternoon of King's Cross Station, and Harry walked out of the platform into the noise and the light and the summer, and it was all in front of him, the case to build, the inquiry to prepare, the year to come, the road that the Phoenix song had described with its soft suggestion of people and movement and a dark shape far ahead that was neither absent nor close. Voldemort was out there. Diminished, disembodied, looking for his next approach with the patience of something that had survived worse. That was real and Harry didn't look away from it. But that was the future. This was a Tuesday in late June on a London train platform, and there were people around him who had chosen to be there, not because they'd been shaped toward it but because they'd decided, and the difference between those two things was everything. Harry walked into the summer. Behind him, King's Cross swallowed the barrier and the platform whole, becoming brick wall, becoming station, becoming ordinary. Ahead, London opened up in all its sprawling impossible human enormity, and the Weasley car was parked, illegally, Mr. Weasley was already anxious about this, on the double yellow lines outside the main entrance, and Ron was arguing with Fred about who had the front seat, and Hermione was explaining to her father what a phoenix was with the patient precision of a daughter who has done this many times with many different subjects, and Neville was talking to his grandmother about herbology, actually talking, with the ease of something long blocked that has found its channel. And Harry stood on the pavement outside King's Cross Station in the June sunshine with Fawkes burning quietly on his shoulder and thought, this is what I actually wanted. Not the destiny. Not the mythology. Not the boy who lived, the boy who would, the boy who must. Just this. People. Honesty. The future unfixed and genuinely open, belonging to whoever was willing to choose into it. He got in the car. It was, predictably, far too small for the number of people attempting to fit into it, and someone's owl cage was on someone else's foot, and Fred was already doing something to the radio that George was already helping with, and Ron was explaining to Harry the specific logistics of a Weasley family road trip, which apparently involved several things that the highway code didn't account for, and Hermione had her notebook out, and Neville was looking out the window at London with the expression of someone seeing a large thing and deciding they are not afraid of it. Fawkes moved from Harry's shoulder to the back window ledge, where he sat burning in the afternoon light, entirely visible to any muggle who happened to look, entirely unconcerned about this, the way things are unconcerned when they have decided that visibility is not a problem. The car moved into traffic. Harry looked out the window and let London move past him, the buildings and the people and the ordinary improbable bustle of a city that didn't know and wouldn't care about phoenixes or prophecies or 57-year plans or boys who had lived and then chosen, which was the better story. He was 11 years old. He had a year of school behind him and the full knowledge of what had been built around him. He had a phoenix bond and 3 friends who had proven themselves in chess chambers and devil's snare and library corridors at 6 in the morning. He had a plan, not someone else's plan, his own, built from real information, aimed at real outcomes, flexible enough to adjust when necessary. He had everything he actually needed. Somewhere in Scotland, in a circular office lined with instruments both functional and dark, an old man sat with a revised plan and a genuine, if complicated, process of reconsideration that would take longer than a summer and might, if it ran its full course, produce something that was worth what it cost. Somewhere in the shadows between lived and not lived, something patient and cold was calculating its next approach with the thoroughness of a creature that had been doing exactly this for longer than most people lived. And somewhere in the back seat of a slightly too small car traveling through the Tuesday afternoon of London, Harry Potter sat in the middle of his actual life and let it be exactly that. Fawkes sang once, briefly, in the back window. Not a vision. Not a warning. Not a breaking or a healing or a choosing. Just a note. Just, here. Now. Good. The car turned into traffic and the summer opened up and everything, finally, was beginning.